awaited session after several postponements. And finally, we are here. So thank you very much for bearing with us, and apologies for those glitches that we experienced earlier in the program. Nonetheless, we are here, and today and tomorrow, our intention, as you would have picked it up in the confirmations that we sent, is to really zoom in onto the process of applying or putting together an application, a sound application for a social housing project or potential social housing project. So today and tomorrow, we're going to unpack at great length, time permitting, in the main, the three elements that are key in us considering applications that are coming through for potential social housing projects. I don't know if I've introduced myself. My name is John Mufukeng. I work for the Social Housing Regulatory Authority, the SHRA. I'm joined by several colleagues here, some portfolio managers, some project accreditation specialists, and some in the support side of the business. I'm not going to take much time in trying to introduce each single one of them, but I think their presence would be of great value in that as we go along and we unpack some of this content, these are the people, these are the process owners that we would need to engage with. So welcome, colleagues, and thank you very much for taking time. Let me request people to just please to keep on mute so that we can secure the quality of this call and make sure that when the recording finally is available, it is without these glitches. So thank you so much. In fact, that just led me to just slightly talking about the logistics. So if we can, for the duration of the time of this program, just keep our mics on mute and cameras. We will, at various stages, take body breaks, comfort breaks, and the facilitator will help us with announcing on those. Perhaps just as context, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, government has set a target to deliver on 18,000 social housing units in this current 5-year period, which started in 2019 and concludes in less than a year from now, 2024. So we are still hard at work. Sleeves have been rolled up at various corners of the country with various delivery partners to try and meet on this target. As we speak, we have just close to 80% in terms of achieving that target. So we could say as a program, we are not doing relatively bad. However, we needed to, by the time we take a report back to the ministry and make sure that we have indeed delivered on the set targets of delivering 18,000. One of the problems or hindrances in us experiencing or being able to deliver on this mandate stems to the quality of applications that comes through in our pipeline, and us taking far too long to actually turn the corner in terms of getting those potential projects accredited. So the intent really for the next 2 days is to just be around this round table and unpack this process. Some of you may at some stage engaged with it, and I guess you being here today is on your attempt to tighten up your efforts so that your applications, as you submit them, have a better chance of successfully being considered for the award of the capital grant. So for the next 2 days, starting with today, we will start off with the tool called QuickScan A, which essentially just seeks to unpack all the due diligence stuff that relates to a private developer launching in an application with a SHRA. What are the things that the SHRA needs to see about you as an applicant in terms of your organization, how you've structured, what are the governance arrangements that you have in place, and. We are not going to spend the entire day because we thought, that is a very clear and straightforward module that we can get through in the next 2 hours. And following that, we'll then jump into the tool called QuickScan B. It's an instrument that we use and that you as an applicant need to be familiar with in your efforts of packaging a project. It really speaks to a whole lot of technical elements that need to be factored in and considered as you package a project. Tomorrow we'll then conclude with a third tool or instrument called QuickScan C, which really would be just us zooming into the finances and the numbers. Now, I'm not going to be doing all that hard work, though I'll be sitting in the background and coming in at various stages, trying to assist where I can. We have requested 2 of our colleagues to lead us in delivering and unpacking this content. I've got Mr. Larry Hobson and my esteemed colleague Tinashe, who will be assisting us with unpacking this content. Let us give full participation. I want to encourage that. Let it not be just an academic lecture, but let us engage with the presentation. Let us engage with the content. As I said, there are process owners in the room, and it would be beneficial that we use the time as well to interact with them on any aspect that perhaps requires their input as well. On that score, I did not want to take much time, but perhaps to hand over the session to Larry Hobson. Larry?
Thank you, John. I'll just do a brief introduction on our stuff that we're going to be going through. So the QuickScan A will be the organizational assessment, and the QuickScan B will be the project technical assessment. It would be useful to know who's in the room in terms of existing skills. So we're sure to have some people who've got no prior housing experience. We're sure to have some people who've got experience as rental landlords or developers or professionals. So we just wanted to do a quick whip around at the start to just see, just by numbers, who's got what kind of experience. Would you be able to, I think we must just use the hand button, to stick up your hand. We'll just do a bit of a census here. If you can see the table on the right-hand side that says skills in the room. Let's first go for those who've got, who are already rental landlords. Can you just press your hand, and we'll just count the hands as they go. I can't see the hands here. I'll just need Tinashe to help me with, when you added up all the hands, I'll give you another 10 seconds.
Okay.
And then I'll just record them in this little table. Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we've
Everyone
got
done?
nine rental landlords, or 10, sorry.
10, okay, good. Right, if we go for developers for sale, the next one, developers for sale, if you can just put your hands up. You don't have to be the developer, you can be employed in a company that's developing. Okay, another 10
We've
seconds.
got, yeah. We've got 6 hands.
6. Okay, good. Developers for rent. Well, you might do both. You know, you might do sale and rent. But let's count them anyway. Let's count. You can put your hand up for both if you're doing both. Okay. How many, Tinashe?
We've got a total of 13.
13. Very good. Okay. Okay, let's just go through. We'll just chose 3 lists of professionals. Any quantity surveyors? First, quantity surveyors. Put your hands up. Okay, how many?
We've got a total of 10 quantity surveyors.
Very good. Architects? Any architects? Yeah.
We've
How
got
many?
a total of 8 architects.
Good. Engineers?
Engineers, we've
Okay.
got about 7, and I think we might have town planners as well. So if you want to maybe just
Yes.
add one more category.
Okay, 7 engineers and town planners. I'll just add them in here. I knew we didn't have a complete list. Yeah. Okay. Town planners, please.
With town planners, we've got a total of 7.
7. Any other skills that we should be counting, or can we move on to those with no prior housing or development experience? Okay, so now we're going to those with no previous experience in this field. Okay.
We've got a total of about 23.
23. Okay. Well, that's good. That's a nice mix. Thank you for that. So we'll try and make it relevant to everybody. So those who are already old hands, please forgive us if we are going in at a basic level, and those who are brand new, please forgive us if some of this stuff goes over your head, but there will be material to be circulated that will give you some more depth in the topics that we're going to be talking through. So yeah, as John mentioned, we'll be having a few breaks. So the first session will be a quick scan A. Then we'll have a break at 10. We don't want any session to be longer than 50 minutes because we know concentration spans last about that long. So every 50 minutes, we'll have a 10-minute break and we'll conclude at 1 o'clock. So with that, let's hand over to Tinashe to start the quick scan A. Over to you, Tinashe. I'll just have to keep scrolling as you talk.
Thanks for that, Larry. Okay, and good morning to everyone on the call. So what I'll be taking you through today is the quick scan A framework that's used by the SHRA when assessing applications. Just to give you a bit of context in terms of Larry and myself, we over the years have done a number of assessments for companies, individuals, developers, professionals that have come through with a range of different applications for purposes of developing social housing units. So what we will try to put across as part of this session is to give you just pointers in terms of our experience and what we've seen that works and that doesn't work, or what's required from the SHRA and where some of the key pitfalls are when people are putting in the applications. Next slide, Larry. So just from a introduction point of view, I think one of the things that we need to do is to understand the accreditation, the process for accreditation, what exactly it is. And essentially accreditation is the process by which the SHRA reviews and supports applications by both social housing institutions and ODAs, other delivery agents, which are essentially private companies, with the aim of capacitating the sector to deliver on the social housing mandate. With regards to this process, depending on the different entity, depending on the entity that goes in for application, they follow a similar process with a couple of nuances. In particular, if we focus on the ODAs, which are the private companies, the process that's followed with regards to gaining accreditation is that the first step is really an assessment of the company. And that's on the right-hand side of your screen. And that first step with regards to the assessments that are done on the company, that's done by what we call the Quick Scan A, which is what I'm taking you through now. And the Quick Scan A is essentially a tool that collects information regarding governance and operational policies and procedures, and assesses the suitability of the governance and operational policy documents for social housing. Once that assessment is done, an institution could essentially become, can gain institutional accreditation, and that's via going through the CAR unit, which is a unit in the SHA called, and CAR stands for Compliance, Accreditation and Regulations Unit. And if you pass this step, for subsequent projects going forward, you only have to then submit changes, only have to submit what has changed. In essence, you wouldn't have to undertake a new Quick Scan A assessment, but only the changes as and when policy amendments are done. Once you've got institutional accreditation, the next step is for a ODA or for an applicant to get project accreditation. Now, when it comes to getting project accreditation, it's the process by which the project that you propose to develop is assessed for financial sustainability and for technical feasibility. Now, when the SHRA does assessments of those on a project level, the key tools that are used to do that assessment is what they call the Quick Scan B and the Quick Scan C. The result of the Quick Scan B and the Quick Scan C should essentially give the SHRA enough of a detailed assessment of the project in order for them to understand whether it's a feasible or a viable project. The next step after you've got institutional accreditation and you've got project accreditation is essentially the operations of the project. You've received the CCG, you've done the development, and your projects going forward are monitored on essentially a quarterly basis, where you have to provide the SHRA with information via another tool on the progress of your project or your projects. So in a nutshell, this is what the accreditation process looks like, and these are the different steps that an application would have to go through in order to get to the point of developing units. Next slide, Larry.
Can I just check at this stage? Our assumption is that most people in the room are other delivery agents, that they're not social housing institutions. So that's why we're focusing mainly on the right-hand side, on the ODAs today.
Thanks, Larry. And also, just for what we will do every maybe every couple of slides, we'll stop and we'll take one or two questions. Obviously, we don't have that much time, but we'll stop and take one or two questions and then move on to the next section. In terms of the actual ODA application, one of the things that the application needs to meet are what we call project minimum investment criteria. And there are essentially 7 items that effectively need to be assessed, need to be fulfilled from a ODA assessment process. Can I please ask that all applicants on the call please mute their mics? Thank you. All right, so the minimum investment criteria that's normally needs to be met is that the project must be a medium to high residential rental stock. The qualifying beneficiaries are people with an income between 1.8 to 22,000 Rand per household. The target, the projects essentially should target a minimum of 30% primary beneficiaries and a maximum of 70% secondary beneficiaries. So in other words, if you've got 100 units that you're looking to develop, 30 of those units need to be made up of primary beneficiaries, and 70% need to be made up of secondary beneficiaries. What are primary beneficiaries? Primary beneficiaries are individuals who earn between 1,000, who have income of between 1,870 and a maximum of 5,500. So that's what we refer to when we talk about primary beneficiaries. The location of the projects is also very important. The developments need to be located within a restructuring zone, and that's as declared by the Minister of Human Settlements to demonstrate that it involves restructuring and urban renewal projects. There needs to be a demonstration of support and commitment from municipal and provincial government, and the proof that that support is there is essentially through letters of support that you need to get from the municipality and or the provincial government as well at the same time. Social housing units must be self-contained with a minimum of 30 square meters. And the applicant, if you're a social housing institution or SHI, must be conditionally or fully accredited. And if you're an ODA, so the majority of the individuals on this call, you must be able to demonstrate that you are able to put in 20% of equity into a project. Now, when we assess applications, one of the biggest stumbling blocks is equity. That's where a lot of applications fail or don't go through to the next step. So when we refer to equity, it comes either in the form of cash, so cash in the bank, which you would have to prove that you've got, or the value of the land comes up to 20% of the total development cost. Now, that value of the land also, I think one of the things that we've seen is that it has to be unencumbered, meaning that there should be no debt that's attached to that piece of land. So a lot of applications, when they come, they've bought a piece of land and they've got a bond next to it, and they try to use that as equity. To a certain extent, you can't do that unless a significant portion of that bond is paid off, which can represent that there's still more than 20% equity involved in the project and so forth. So be careful when you undertake to do this project with 20% equity. Next slide, Larry. Next slide. So with regards to the ODA application itself, there are a couple of fundamentals that are key requirements for putting an application together. And just for your view is that the way applications are assessed is that they're essentially assessed at two levels. They're assessed at an institutional level, so in other words, at a company level or your entity level, and then they are also assessed at a project level. When we do these assessments, there are a couple of documents you need to provide. At an entity or at a company level, you will be required to provide legal form information, and that's essentially company registration documents or SPVs for social housing stock. For social housing stock, and SPV stands for special purpose vehicles. And I'll explain this in a little more detail. That some companies develop units that are not only social housing related. And if you then are looking to develop social housing units, one of the requirements is that you would need to ring fence that social housing stock and essentially separate it from your other units that you currently have in your portfolio. And one of the ways to do that is to put the social housing stock into a special purpose vehicle. From a governance perspective, one of the things that are looked at or assessed is the skills of the board. So you need to have a board in place. The directors that are part of the company need to be appointed, and documentation proving that appointment needs to be put in place. There are transformation targets that need to be met that will take you through. And importantly, a long-term or strategic business plan is also put in place. It also needs to be put in place. Organizational performance management policies also need to be in place. Operational policies, B certificate, which is essentially an easy win for a lot of people on the call, and audited financial statements as well for the last 2 years. At a project level, one of the key elements that we look at is land ownership. So we need to understand the structure of how that land is owned, whether it's in a restructuring zone, what type of equity is being put forward into the project, whether there's that provincial and municipal support, and the project development concepts, which includes things that you would know, such as site plans, feasibilities, town planning, and support of engineering services. Next slide, please, Larry. Okay, so from a transformation point of view, we note that the SHRA is committed to transformation of the sector. And when we speak about transformation in the social housing space, there are essentially 4 key criteria that the SHRA looks at. It looks at the ownership of the building. It looks at the management control, but not only at a board level, but also at a board level and the executives involved. We look at the employment equity at a senior and junior level. What type of skills development are in place from a transformation point of view, and what services are outsourced, and what supply development is done, and how it relates to transformation. Most of this information will find itself going into some of your supporting documents and also in your business plan as well. So you need to make sure that you address this as part of the supporting documents that you provide. Next slide, please, Larry. All right, so most of you would probably be wondering, what is the process that one goes through when applying for grant funding for social housing units? Essentially, the process is split into two different processes. The first is the process that deals with the quick scan A, which is this document. And the second process is the project development and funding process, which takes into account the information received in the quick scan A, and also some of the and really looks at the project level information, which is the technical side of the project in the quick scan B, and the financial feasibility, which is represented by the quick scan C. When you submit your proposal, one of the first things that you need to do is that you need to make sure you meet the minimum investment criteria that we spoke about earlier, which is at a project level and also at an institution level. Assuming that you've got all the information ready to go, the process then goes, your application goes to what they call a CAR Management Committee, which is the Compliance, Accreditation and Regulations Committee, where an assessor then presents your application for the committee to deliberate on. And if they're happy with the information that's provided, the project is essentially approved or recommended rather, to go to an EXCO level, which is the second committee meeting that you meet, that your project is presented to. And if they are happy with the application, they then recommend your application for approval to the SHRA Council, and the SHRA Council goes through the same process. And if there's approval at that process, you get essentially accreditation for essentially it's entity accreditation or institutional accreditation. After you've got an institutional accreditation, you as the applicant will likely also start going into the process of clearly defining some of the project parameters that you have in place, where you want to deliver projects, and all the technical and financial areas of a particular project. Once you've got that pack ready, that pack again is submitted to the SHRA, and it then via assessors who assess your application pack, and that application then gets presented to what they call a Project Accreditation Committee, the PAC. Again, it follows another process where your project gets reviewed, and if approved, it moves to a Technical Evaluation Committee, where again it gets presented, and if approved, it then goes to an Investment Committee, and again, if assessed and approved, it goes to the it gets recommended rather to the SHRA Council, who then approve, and you then are eligible to get the CCG grant. One of the questions that we get throughout this process is, well, we understand the process, but what are the timelines involved? What we've seen through the applications that we've assessed is that projects can take anywhere from 6 months to 1.5 years. The key to making sure that you go through this process in the most efficient or in the most efficient time possible is to make sure that you've accounted for every single requirement that the SHRA gives you in the quick scan A, B, and C in a sufficient level of detail in order for the process to go quickly. Another example is that you may, for example, be missing a tax compliance document. Now, the SHRA, and John, you'll tell me if I'm correct here, but the SHRA normally meets on a quarterly basis to go through proposals, to go through applications. And when they meet, and if there are documents that are outstanding in your pack, for example, a tax clearance certificate, your project will not go through in that quarter or in that round, and you would have to wait another 3 months for the committee meeting to meet again, and that will further delay your project by 3 months. So you have to make sure you get all the information in correctly. Next slide, please, Larry. All right, so the quick scan A, just some other information that is also quite pertinent is that in compiling the ODA submission, we have encountered cases where a lot of applications have been essentially copied from previous applications and so forth. And I can tell you now that the SHRA has pretty much got very good at picking up where areas are plagiarized. So please be careful to make sure that you tailor your policies and procedures to the specific situation that you're in. And, tenant management policies, one can argue, should look roughly the same, but there are nuances that you have depending on where you are, the location of the project, the type of environment that you're in, that you would need to make sure you look at. Next slide, please, Larry. So when you're putting in your initial application, there are about 28 plus minus 28 different documents that you need to put together. And again, I stress that if you, for example, put together 27 or 26 of the 28 documents, your project or your application is at risk of not going through to the next stage. You will receive a communication from the SHRA requesting additional outstanding documents before the committee meeting, so that at least it gives you a bit of a heads up that these pieces of information are still outstanding. But if you aren't able to provide all 28 pieces of information, there is a bit of a risk around your application not going forward. But in general, the type of information is sort of board approved financial control policies, a completed quick scan A tool, which is an Excel based tool. You need to be able to provide a business plan, a board charter, a code of conduct and duties of directors, letters of appointment for both key staff, directors and board members, and also internal management policies, and a conflict of interest register and policy as well. Next slide, please. From mandates of the various subcommittees also need to be provided. Normally, when you're a new entity, you most likely only have probably a board and maybe an audit and risk committee. But as you grow bigger as an institution, you're starting to enter into areas where you might have, for example, a remuneration committee and so forth, and all those board or subcommittees would need to have mandates that the committee meetings can work with. Risk management policies also need to be in place. Legal compliance policies, anti-fraud and corruption policies need to be in place. Anti-discrimination policies, organizational performance management, founding documents. And when we speak about founding documents, it's not just the registration document. You also need to submit your memorandum of incorporation, which is important, and that is able to give the SHRA a view of what the organization is set up for. Articles of association and again the certificate of incorporation. So within, for example, founding documents, you might find the case that you would need to submit more than just one piece of information, but these are broad strokes of what type of information you would need to put together. Next slide, Larry. And lastly, of the 28 documents, these are the last types of documents you would need to put together. You would need a board approved development policy and procedure. You need a valid SARS tax clearance certificate. And just on that note as well, we do the check. So you submit, I think in SARS these days, you can submit a PIN, and that PIN is then verified against what is in the e-filing system. And if you are non-compliant, that is what gets put across. So you need to make sure that whatever information you put regarding your taxes needs to be compliant. A long-term maintenance plan also needs to be put together, and the property management policies, tenant management policies, and organizational info and details of the grant received by the organization as well. So I'll take you through a little more detail of what the expectation is from the STRA in terms of the content that some of these application documents need to come out through in the next couple of slides. All right. So in terms of the actual assessment itself, the assessment is essentially broken down into a number of core functional areas. So again, the first one is an assessment is done of the internal management of the organization. There's an assessment that deals with the financial sustainability of the organization, revenue, costs, profit or loss. An assessment of tenant management is done, and whether an applicant is able to manage the tenants and whether they have the right skills or experience to do that. Same thing for property management, property development. And underlying all of this is that you must make sure you have the right legal form and the right governance framework in place. Next slide. Again, when we see applications, one of the things that there are a couple of key criteria items that we would term as easy wins. So these are key criteria items that we often is the case that we see that a lot of applications don't meet some of these key criteria items, but they don't take a lot of time to put together, and in some cases only require a signature. So an easy win is a tax clearance certificate, easy to get. So is a BEE certificate as well. Board resolutions are also important, and those are easy wins that only just need to be signed by the chairperson in order to work okay. Your latest 2-year financial statements, if you have any, as well as the latest management accounts as well. In terms of the board CVs, we're not looking for a 10-page document in terms of the CVs of the board, but what the STRA is looking for is essentially a view of or rather, they are looking to get an understanding of what the skill levels are of the board that is in place. So a 1-page document would essentially be okay with the levels of experience and education and so forth, would make for a quick and easy win. Again, as service level agreements for outsourced services such as security, accounting, property management, those documents should relatively be easy to get if that's the route that you take as an ODA. Next slide, please. So before we get into another section, I'm going to stop there and maybe just pause for maybe 2 to 3 minutes and see if we can get some questions and see if we can answer any questions and comments. I'll open the floor. Maybe if you could raise your hand up, and then we'll see from there. I see here I've got, let me have a look at the hands here, Larry. I'll have a look at from my side. Okay, we have a hand from Teboho.
Yes, Minir. Basically, I realized it looks like you have 2 application streams. Are you saying you can do a project without necessarily being accredited by STRA and do it on the project basis, per project basis? Can you please elaborate?
Okay, thank you. All right, let me take the next question. That is from Lazola.
Thank you, sir. My question is on the equity and the tax clearance. I'll start with the equity. Let's say you purchase a piece of land, and let's say it's zoned agricultural, and then you then go again and change the land use to commercial or housing, or any zoning that can allow housing, residential. Res. So the value changes from commercial to resident, to the residential. Will you use the value of the property when I purchased it, or now when it's ready?
Okay, thank you.
To do the development.
All right, I'll take. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. And then on the tax clearance issue, the tax clearance certificate, I can send all my introduction documents. And at that, when I was sending that email, my tax clearance was not active. And then 3 days later, they updated. And then I send it to you guys. Do you notify the applicant that their tax clearance is not updated at that moment so that they can rectify it? Thanks, sir.
Thank you. All right, I'll just take 2 more questions and then I'll answer all questions at the same time. On my list here, I've got El Muligwe, and I'll take one last question from Amos.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to conscientize the meeting or the facilitators that there are few SHIs here. We got invitation to attend. I see that the move is more on the ODA. I don't know if it's relevant for us to be here or we can continue, but if we continue, also touch on the SHI requirements as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And last one, Amos.
Thank you, sir. I had actually 2 questions. One was relating to the value of the land, whether do you consider the value of the land considering, say, like now, maybe the site or the property itself, it's currently zoned agricultural, but the value of the land, example, it is more than what it's part of the requirement. And then secondly, when that land has then, or rather the landowner has acquired the necessary land use rights, which of course would then change the land value based on the current land use rights. Then the second part was with regards to, in the openings, John, he made mention of since the process started in 2019 and we left with almost over a year, and the process to assess these applications, it's over a year as well. What would you then do in a situation whereby an application, say it's submitted now, and then we left with less than a year to actually meet the target as per the 2019 inception of the process itself? What you do it? Does it carry it over to the next financial year? Or what would then happen in the process, considering the assessment timelines? Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Please can ask everyone mute, and then I'll answer the questions one by one. Okay, so the first question is from Tebogo, and whether I think if I understood correctly, the question was around whether do you need accreditation in order to for projects to be undertaken via the SHRA? And the answer to that is all the first port of call for getting any type of funding is that your project, your institution needs to be accredited. And for your institution to be accredited, you need to undertake the quick scan A assessment, which is this document that we're taking you through, in order for you to get accreditation. Once you've got accreditation, you can then go and apply for projects using the quick scan B and the quick scan C. Right. The next question is for Lasola, and the question is around equity and the need to change. So I think you mentioned that there was a need to change the zoning from farm to residential, and whether you need to submit and what happens with regards to the valuation. So the valuations are assessed at multiple levels, but essentially you would need to submit your own valuation of the property or of the land. And the SHRA on their side, they also undertake their own independent valuation to verify the valuation that you've done. It's very seldom that we've seen that the land valuation that's provided by constitutes more than 20% of the equity. So that's just something you need to bear in mind, that in most cases the valuation normally doesn't meet that 20% equity requirement from what we've seen. Particularly for land that was previously farmland. But I'm not saying that that's the case in your case, but that's something that we've seen that happens. In terms of tax, the next question that you asked was if your taxes, if when you submitted your application, your taxes had not yet been compliant or were not yet active, and the question was, sorry, please, Zola, please can you unmute your mic? Zola, please can you mute your mic? Thank you. All right. So when you submit your information, again, you submit all your operational policies and your legal form policy documentation. At that same point in time, you submit your tax information as well. That information then gets sent to an assessor who does a check of the information that you've received, including a check of your taxes. And if they do a check on your taxes and they see that there's non-compliance, that information is fed back to the car unit of the SHRA, who then should feed back that information to you. It may sometimes happen that the feedback loop is a lot longer than you may anticipate or you may want to, or it may even happen after a committee meeting, for example. But my understanding is that the information that is outstanding you should be made aware of the information that's made outstanding for you to rectify within a very short period of time. El Muligwe, you asked a question about whether this type of training is relevant for social housing institutions. The answer is yes. Whether you are a ODA, a private institution, or a social housing institution, the processes that we are outlining here are the same that you would need to follow as a social housing institution. So yes, you would need to put together the same governance documents. You would need to put together the same operational documents. You would also need to submit a tax clearance and so forth. So this training is also very much applicable to social housing institutions. Amos, you asked about the value of the land. What if the value of what if it's more than what if the land is more than the value? I'm not sure I understood the question, so I'll go maybe to the second one where Amos, Chris, Larry, maybe did you get Amos's question? I don't think I quite understood it.
Yeah, it was about rezoning. It was similar to Tebogo's question, where land is being rezoned and will have a higher value after the rezoning. And the other part was about assessment timelines.
All right. So maybe let me ask the question around timelines. So when you submit a project, Tula, please can you mute your mic? When you submit an application, your application goes into what the SHRA calls a project pipeline. And then that project pipeline has a list of all the different applications that have come through from the SHRA, that have come through to the SHRA. In that same pipeline, you could have projects that started in 2018, some that started in 2019, some that started as early as yesterday, and they'll all be there. I think it's to the discretion of the SHRA in terms of what remains on that pipeline. John, from your side, I'm not sure if you can assist as to whether there are timelines to how long an application can stay in the pipeline before it's removed from the pipeline.
So I have my colleague in the room who actually manages that side of the process. Tinashe, maybe Sanele can come in.
Hi, Tinashe and all attendees. So basically, our process is that what we do is we do a verification report, and we assess all the documents that have been submitted, and we'll share with the applicant. When the applicant responds to that, they're given 3 days to respond to that verification report. If they're not responsive in those 3 days, then we issue a decline letter. However, we have applicants perhaps that are still working on applications. As long as you are responsive, we are able to engage and facilitate you further. So in terms of timelines, it is after receiving a verification report, 3 days to respond to the verification report, of which we will update. However, we do extend the timelines depending on how responsive the applicant is, or we recommend them further to sector development and transformation for grant support.
Got that?
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. All right. Colleagues, I see it's 9:55. I know we were going to break at 10 o'clock, so I'm not sure it's worth starting out on the new section. Perhaps I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute comfort break. I will put myself in mute, and then at 10 o'clock we will begin again. And John and Larry, are you guys happy with that, or is Yeah.
That's fine. Everybody happy with 5 minutes? Anyone need longer? Okay, see you.
All right, see you at 10.
See you at 10. Bye.
Okay, all right. It's 10 o'clock on my watch. I think we can start now with the next slide, Larry. Thank you. All right, so the section that we'll take you through now is a little more detail again around what the quick scan A is. So essentially it's a spreadsheet model. It's an Excel model, and it's not a very complicated model. What it has that's to your benefit is that it gives you a register of all the documents that are required for you to submit when putting in the application. So there's a checklist, and you can check whether you're putting in the right information based on that. It also has a section where you put in information around your company registration documents, who are the directors and their details. And also it has another section that deals with your portfolio composition or what pipeline of projects that you plan on putting across. Now, the Quick Scan A, as mentioned earlier, it's just an Excel document. And what needs to accompany this documentation, this tool or this Quick Scan A, is a variety of supporting documentation, documents that relate to financial sustainability, the management accounts, documents that relate to how you're going to govern this entity, the board charter, the code of conduct. You need to provide legal compliance information, tax clearance, legal compliance, anti-fraud information, tenant management information, property management, property development, and internal management. Now, how will you submit this? Essentially, the Shroud, if I'm correct here, I think they send you a file directory system. Larry, I don't know if you want to just show it on the screen quickly. Similar to what Larry is going to put on the screen now. And that file directory system has, for example, it says QuickScan A, B, and C, and it's got the folder for supporting documentation, and then you'll see it's got this type of file directory where what your role in this case would be to essentially then take the supporting documents and upload them into the correct file directory. So, for example, risk management, or let's take taxes, because that's what if you just go back to financial. Or number one, audited financial statements, you would open that folder, and in that folder, you would upload your financial information going forward. Okay. All right. Thanks, Larry. We can go back to the presentation. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, so it's just some key concepts that I think it's important for the members of this call to understand, is that when we talk about governance or corporate governance, the framework that's used here is that this is essentially a framework and prescripts for systematic and sustainable leadership, business ethics, strategy, business planning, process, policies, procedures, and effective control for institutions. We know that when we look at the governance concepts and framework, there are a number of different governance hard-coded law, what we call hard-coded law, that you would need to take into account. That's the Companies Act, the PFMA, MFMA, and the Cooperative Act as well. Again, when it comes to some of your governance policies and procedures, one of the things that we would recommend that you look at as well is the King Code 4, and make sure that you are compliant with what the King Code would recommend with regards to your governance structures. Next slide, please. Again, this is just a little bit more information around the King Code 4 and the broad framework around this. It does deal with leadership, ethics, and corporate citizenship, strategy, performance, and reporting, governance structures, and delegation, which is quite important for you as an ODA or SHI, governance, functional areas, and stakeholder relationships. So these are all documents that you need to look at and use the information from the King Code to provide content for your strategic business plan and also for your performance management policy. Next slide. Again, same thing here, is that the governance structures and delegation is something that you would need to look at, and the King Code does cover how you deal with independence, how you do with delegation, performance evaluation, and appointment and delegation. Next slide, please. Again, with the King Code 4 will also provide you with information or content that you can use in some of your application documents. In this particular case, information for legal compliance, the risk register, information management policies, and remuneration policies should be received from the King Code, or should at least provide you with a broad framework to update some of your output documents or your application documents. Next slide, please. And you will receive this pack, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, given the time that we have. But essentially, all the governance policies and procedures that you have, they somehow connect to each other, and therefore, to ensure integrity of the policies, you need to make sure that you have a board charter that speaks to the code of conduct, that speaks to the conflict of interest, and also to the anti-fraud and corruption case. And the information in those in your policies should also appear in your letters of appointment and draft contracts that you have for your board, for your exco, and also and where relevant, with any other contracts or appointment letters that you may have in place. So maybe that's just a point to stress here, is that a lot of what we see in the letters of appointment, we, for example, will get a letter that says that Director XYZ has been appointed to ODA XYZ or SHI XYZ, and we thank you for accepting the appointment of this position. And that's as far as the letter of appointment goes. So that type of letter of appointment will not be compliant, and you'll be requested to submit another letter of appointment that then states that you need to make sure that the letters of appointment include references to your board charter, if it was a board member, or references to a code of conduct and code and conflict of interest. So make sure that you have these documents aligned to what is in the letters of appointment. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so we spoke earlier about the legal form, and that you, as one of the requirements from a SHI or ODA point of view, is that you would need to submit documents that give information around the legal form. For social housing institutions, you need to put in information around whether you're a PTY limited company or a not-for-profit, or whether you're a municipal-owned entity or a housing cooperative, share block company, or communal property association or a trust. If you were an ODA, you would need to the type of ownerships are not necessarily stated in the regulations. However, ODAs are typically for-profit entities, so they're private companies, and they normally come in the form of a private limited company or a share block company. Very important is that whichever type of entity you are, your CIPC documents must be accompanied with a memorandum of incorporation. Now, that memorandum of incorporation, if you were to do it via CIPC, if I remember correctly, CIPC provides all company registrants with a standardized template of a memorandum of incorporation. However, for the purposes of applying for SHRA accreditation and projects and so forth, and as part of the regulations, the MOI must state that the main business is provision of rental or cooperative housing options for low to medium income households. What that means essentially is that you would need to then amend your MOI and submit it to the CIPC, and then at the end of it all, receive approval that the amendments to the Memorandum of Incorporation have been done. If you submit a letter or a draft of a Memorandum of Incorporation that you've done internally, and you haven't submitted any level of acceptance from CIPC, then again, you are not compliant. So it's not just a case of amending the MOI internally, but it needs to be accepted by CIPC. With regards to your business plan and organogram, the main business, the institution independent from other entities is something that you need to make sure that you put across that you are an independent institution. If you are, if you're not, again, if you have the right policies in place, this is something that would be seen on your declarations. Next slide, please. All right, if I think this perhaps maybe then really does apply more to ODAs in this case here. So what is the SHRA looking for when it comes to ownership? So if you're a private company on this call, what is it that we're looking for? We know that if you're a private company, it essentially means that you are a company that has shareholders. And if you do have shareholders, essentially more than one shareholder, we would expect to see a shareholders agreement, and that would need to be submitted. If you have, and depending on the type of ownership structure that you have, you would also be required to submit a members agreement if necessary, a joint venture agreement if necessary, and an ownership organogram. So, and essentially the ownership organogram tries to get to an individual level. So if your company is owned by two other companies, you would then need to provide the information of those two companies as well to get to the point where we can tie back the organization to a specific individual. If we can't do that, again, you will be requested to submit those documents as we go along. The CIPC documents, as we stated, would be the founding documents, and you must be able to provide share certificates in the register as well. And in terms of the board profile, the entity also needs to provide experience of skilled people who are able to assist with strategy and business management, tenant and property management, finance, property development, legal, community development. Another interesting case, or what we've seen, is that I see we've got a lot of them on this call here. We see there are architects, for example, that will put in an application, and then the board, they'll have a range of, or they'll either have themselves, or they'll have a range of technical skills. But when we look into the detail of the skills of the individuals on the board, and if we normally won't be able to find any finance type related skills or legal skills or community development skills, and that then becomes a red flag in terms of the profile of the board. So whoever you are, if you have a technical skill set, or you have a set of technical skills that you can easily put on the board, make sure that your board is diverse enough to be able to undertake the other areas that would be required for our board level. Next slide, please. I think we spoke about this earlier. One of the key criteria items you would have to put together is a list of the board profiles. Again, it doesn't have to be a 10-page document, but you do need to provide a brief CV of the chairperson, a name and a photo. And really what the SHRA is trying to assess here is to understand what are the key skill sets that your board has and where are the gaps. So you need to make sure that there aren't any gaps. If there are gaps, that's something that will be pointed out, and it will make your application a lot difficult going forward. Next slide, please. Back one, next slide. Okay, I think, yeah, maybe let's just go through the board charter, maybe one or two more slides, and then I'll take a round of questions again. In terms of the board charter, so the board charter is essentially a document that you also need to put together and submit, and it should clearly define the respective roles, responsibilities, and the ruling classes of the board of directors. And not only the board of directors, but also what happens for the chief executive of the organization as well. Some of the key elements of the board charter, they are in the SHRA governance manual, so we would recommend that you have a look at that. One of the things that you need to note is that the role of the chairperson the chairperson of the board needs to be an independent chairperson, and the role of the CEO is based on delegated authority. You need to note that the board committee terms of reference follow a similar structure as well, as long as any other committees that you would put in place. Next slide, please. Again, most of this information is readily available, but just to reiterate that the key sections to the board charter, so these are sections that when an assessor is looking for, they are specifically looking at these for these specific titles or headers, and then reading through the content that are in those sections. What is the composition of the board? What responsibilities have the board been given? How does the board operate? Is there any training for directors? What are the policies and procedures that have been put in place for directors' remuneration and liability? And has the role of this company secretary been included in the board charter? Next slide. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and maybe if you just go one slide up, Larry, and then we'll take a round of questions. I've got there someone who's got their camera on. Please turn your camera off, and also please can you mute your mic? I don't know who that is. Okay, round of questions. I've got here Raymond, and anyone else? Anyone with their hands up? Anyone with any questions? Okay, we'll take Raymond's question, and then we can move along.
Thank you once again. I have a question here in connections with the board executive or secretary or members of the entity. If, let's say, I've identified one of the board members or executive or management, are we allowed to identify one of them to be a government official? What will happen to that? Because those are the people that we know they have a potential in terms of knowledge and experience and skills.
Okay, got you. And then I've got another hand, Mandla.
Thank you. Yeah, just looking at your board requirements and the criteria that you look at for a new entity, I mean that would be quite a demand on them in terms of being able to set up your board. The board, it's such a structure. Normally, new entities would have the owners being directors. How would you weigh that up when you're looking at a new entity?
Okay, thank you. All right, that's it. Those are the two questions we've got. So Raymond, I'll answer your question around that. I think what it sounds like is that you've identified a company secretary who you want on the board or is already on the board, and that person happens to be a government official. And I suppose the question is that appropriate? Is it not? And my official first gut feeling is that no, it's not appropriate. I think there are sections that, well, rather one of the things that the SHRA does is that it undertakes a probity assessment, which tries to assess some of the key conflict of interest. And I think having a government official as part of your board would form part of a conflict of interest. And we certainly wouldn't recommend that you go down that route. Secondly, Mandla, your question around the board requirements and whether for a new entity, whether it is something that a new entity would need to have. So it's a bit of a tough one. I agree with you that for smaller entities, having a board and a board charter may appear to be onerous. However, from a corporate governance point of view, that is one of the key requirements that you need to have. So whether you are a small entity or a bigger entity, one of the key requirements, and as per the regulations that are in place currently, you would still need to put together a board charter with a board that is able to have all the appropriate skills for this engagement. Okay, I'm gonna take one last question. I see you have Lois. Is it Feroza? Feroza. Feroza, we can't hear you. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Loiso, last question.
Yes, thank you, man. I think my question is, for instance, now I'm listening to this presentation, but whatever. Is there any way that we can get this presentation so that we can go through after the whole workshop? That's one question. And also, is it appropriate to get a managing director or a CEO from our board members to appoint from our board members a one who can be a CEO?
Okay, thanks, Loiso. All right, the question around are you going to get this material? Yes, the answer is yes, this material will be made available to you at a point in time. And the second question, I suppose, is can your CEO or executive also be part of the board? So traditionally, an executive member can be part of a board, and that's not a problem. However, I think one of the things, there was an application that came in recently where the CEO was also the chairperson of the board. And if that's the case, one of the key requirements of the quick scan A assessment is that you need to prove that there's independence at a chairperson level board, at a chairperson level. And if your executive is also the chairperson, then that is a lack of independence. So avoid making a chairperson the CEO, and make sure that you need to make sure you keep an independent board in place. Okay, Larry, I think we can move on to the next one. Thank you. All right, I think you can move on to the next slide, please. I think there's someone, Raymond, please can you unmute?
Yes, excuse me. I was about to answer in connection with the board member, the chairman, to be a CEO. According to King for
Okay, all right. I think he's muted himself. Okay. All right. Some of the other key items that you need to put in place are what we've termed integrity policies. What are integrity policies? This is your code of conduct policy. This is your conflict of interest policy for directors and also for staff. So at most institutions, what we've also seen is that they've got a conflict of interest, and the conflict of interest, number one, is not in your letters of appointment letters. Number two is only directed towards your directors. That conflict of interest policy must apply across the organization for both directors and staff. Same goes for your anti-fraud and corruption policy as well. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, letters of appointment, like we were mentioning, you need to make sure in your letters of appointment that you include a specific KPI setting and monitoring section. There has to be a performance review section in your letters of appointment, which link to your performance management plan. So I think, as you can see, all the documents that you are going to put together, they somehow have a link with other policies or procedures and so forth. So there's got to be a common thread across all the documentation that you provide. Conflict of interest, also the same, and also anti-discrimination as well. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, from a legal compliance point of view, what is the SHRA looking for? The first is the tax clearance certificates. Again, this is an easy win. You should have no issue in providing that. However, what the information that you do provide, you need to make sure that it is compliant, because there will be a check done against your company name as to whether the entity that you're putting together is tax compliant. You need to also have a register of the legislative framework that you need to take into account. This is a list of all the legislation that affects your operations. Have a read through the Social Housing Act. Have a read through the Consumer Protection Act, Companies Act, King 4 guidelines, and all of this will assist you in putting together a proper legal compliance framework that when you submit it to the SHRA, we can see that information has been taken into account. Next slide. Okay, performance management. Again, in your performance management document, when we do the assessment, what we are looking for is that we're looking to understand whether there has been an identification of key performance indicators, what and how are those measurements being undertaken, and how is the information collected on the performance for the full range of services provided by the institution. So you need to make sure you have key performance indicators for tenant management, for property management, even for property development and the operations. So it's not just a policy, but it's got to have identifiable and measurable key performance indicators. Next slide. Next slide. Again, same with the risk management. In terms of risk management, a detailed risk register and risk map must be submitted. Often we get the case where one or two risks are identified and put into a table and then submitted as a risk register. Well, we actually go through that risk register in detail, and as you can imagine from an assessor point of view, we now have an understanding of what the key risks are for most social housing institutions. And again, it depends on what level an organization is. If you are starting out, for example, you run the risk of not being able to properly manage your tenants or not having the right level of experience and so forth. And these are all risks that you would need to put in place. The purpose of the risk register is not only just to point out where certain areas of weakness are, but also then not only to identify them, but then to put measures in place to make sure that those risks are mitigated. One of the key risks that we saw, maybe not so much now, but a couple of years ago, perhaps with elections coming up now, is the risk of rental boycotts. So you as the applicant need to be aware that that's something that could happen, and what are the mitigating strategies that you would have to put in place to prevent from rental boycotts from happening, as an example. Next slide. Okay. I believe we've got Sanele on the line, and these are just some of the individuals who you can reach out to if you need a little more information. Sanele and Shilombe. Sanele, I think you're on the line. I don't know if Sanele is also, if Shilombe is also on the line as well, but that's just for you to keep. This information again will be provided to you as we go along. All right, next slide, please. All right, tenant management. We've got a couple of easy wins. And for your benefit, the SHRA has some of these templates on the website as well. So you feel free to look at them, use them, but amend them to your specific application. But you would be required to provide the following from a tenant management perspective: a lease agreement, house rules, tenant satisfaction surveys, residential profile report, and that comes from sort of some of the rental credit bureaus, TPN, and so forth, and the tenant training manual material as well, which is available on the SHRA website. Next slide. I think we're almost done. All right, from a tenant management policies and procedures, again, what are we looking for? You will submit, you will be required to submit the tenant management policy. As part of the tenant management policy, when an assessment is done, we need to look and understand how are you as an applicant are going to do take on of tenants. How is letting going to be done? The marketing of units, what is the process that we will follow in terms of marketing your units? Is it done in a fair and open and transparent process? And is there an end user training program that will also be provided? We also note that in a lot of social housing institutions, conflict resolution is quite important. As you can imagine, with the number of units that you may potentially be dealing with, you would need a system in place in order to do that. And lastly, how you undertake exit or termination systems. So you can see with this level of detail, it's not just enough to have professional skills as part of your team. You also would need individuals who are skilled in tenant management as well. And the same would apply for property management and property development. Next slide. Okay, I won't go through this, but essentially it says the same thing about tenant management policies and procedures. You need to have you need to have systems of control in place to manage tenant complaints effectively, which we've spoken about, and also essentially a feedback loop where tenants can also consult with you at the same time. Next slide. All right, marketing of units. A couple of points here, or tips rather, that when you do go about the marketing of units, I think one of the key things that you need to do is that you need to make sure you establish demand for the product. You know what the first rule of property development is? It's location, location, location. So you need to make sure that wherever you are planning on building or establishing social housing units, there is demand in that area. The market is important, the segment is important, and the mix of people in that area is also quite important as well. In terms of take on, make sure that you cover how you screen your tenants for affordability, proof of income, prior benefits from a subsidy if they're over 21. Most institutions that we've seen, especially the ones that are coming up now, I've got waiting lists, and that's an important indicator for you to understand what type or level of demand you might have for a potential project, and if the unit is successfully let to the clients based on the qualification criteria. So the qualification criteria for coming into a social housing unit is not a Coca-Cola, but it is based on a qualification criteria that you have in place. Okay, next slide, please. All right, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but I think it's just for you to get an understanding that there are letting policies that you need to put in place, lease agreement processes, training, house rules. From a communication point of view, how do you communicate with your tenants and how do they communicate back to you? How you resolve complaints management will be important, and how you resolve disputes is something that you'll also need to look at. Next slide. All right, so if there's anything we can leave you with here is that make sure you get your business plan correct. When any assessor looks at your application pack, before they go into your supporting documents, before they look at your legal compliance, before they look at anything, the first document that they look at is your business plan. The business plan will give the assessor and will give the SHRA an understanding or an idea of how far exactly you are in your social housing journey. It must be able to, at the very least, provide information as to who you are. You know, we get applications where there's a paragraph spiel about this entity is meant for social housing and so forth, but really what we're really trying to understand is who are the individuals who are running this company, what are their names, what do they do, is there a structure in place, and what are they here for? That's what the business plan should be able to tell you. It should also be able to give you information about how you plan on undertaking these activities. So a typical example of this is tenant management. Normally in new institutions or smaller institutions, the cost of running your tenant management internally can be much more than what you receive in rental income. So what we see a lot of applications doing, for example, is in the first couple of years or months or whatever, they outsource that service to service providers who can assist whilst you capacitate your organization as you go along. Now, that type of articulation needs to be given in the business plan so that there's an understanding that you as the applicant understands or realizes that you don't have the capabilities to do tenant management, which is a core part of social housing, and that you have a plan in place to outsource this service to someone who does and learn at the same time as you grow your organization. But that level of information, if we don't see it and we see that it's a small institution and they have this big grand plan of hiring 20 people from day one, and they only have 100 units that they're going to put in development, you can already see that the plan hasn't been well thought through. So you need to make sure, if you're an ODA or even if you're a private company, how you set your structure and how you explain how that structure is put in place must be in the business plan. A very important part that we look at is the financial plan itself. What is the financial plan? A financial plan, or rather, what should a financial plan have in it? It must have an income statement for 5 years. It must have a cash flow statement. It must have a balance sheet, and it must have a set of assumptions that drive these calculations. The level of detail that you need to put in this plan is essentially on a line-by-line basis. If you, for example, did develop a 5-year forecast and you had a line that says my operating costs on a yearly basis comes up to 4.5 million, and that's all you leave in your application, you will get a request to provide a breakdown of that 5 million rand into the different line items. So the level of detail that you put in your financial forecast needs to be at such a level that you're able to break down the number of units that you think you're going to have in place, and when those units will ramp up over the next 5 years or 12 months or whatever the case is, the levels of revenue or rental income that you anticipate to receive, and also if there's any other revenue that you might also have, and the detail of the operating costs. Remember that this information that you put in your financial plan must tie back to other areas of your business plan. Another example of this is that if you state that you are going to have, you're going to have 10 people on your payroll, at another place in your business plan, there needs to be an an org structure, and that org structure also needs to align with the information that you've put in your plan. So if you've got an organizational structure that shows 15 people, but your financial plan has costed only 10 people, well, there's a gap of 5 people. And that again is something that you'll be asked to amend, and it may affect the timelines of your application. So that's the level of detail that you want to get into. All right, next slide, Larry. All right, what the SHRA has provided you is a table of a typical table of contents that you should have in your business plan. So strategic framework, for example, is a header or a title that you will see in a business plan, and you've got the following sub bullets underneath that: vision, mission, values. You need to be able to state your strategic goals and KPIs. The organization has another heading in your business plan, of which you'll have a subheading called background of the entity, and you give a background of who you are and why you are doing this and what the purpose is of this, and how your organization will be structured at a board level. Who are the board members? What are their names? What do they do? What do they provide? What benefit do they provide to the organization? Who are your key operational staff members? How is it owned, and what are the ownership structures look like from a percentage perspective? Are there any empowerment credentials, company details? Performance management, also similarly, same thing would need to be undertaken there as well. Next slide. SWOT analysis, pestle analysis, stakeholder analysis. I think these are all standard areas in any business plan that you will need to put in place. Interestingly enough, some of the weaknesses that our expectation in any case would be, some of the weaknesses that you will potentially have in your organization are actually risks to your organization. So again, there needs to be a link between what you put in your SWOT analysis and what you put in your risk management plan. And those two need to talk to each other. A market demand and supply analysis is very important. However, these are also assessed at a quick scan B and quick scan C level, but you do need to provide an understanding or an awareness that you understand what the demand and supply dynamics are in the particular areas that you're wanting to build social housing units. A maintenance plan also needs to be put in place, tenant management, capacitation plan, and a capacitation plan is what we spoke about earlier, where you recognize that you may not have some of the skills internally, and you have a plan for how you bridge that gap over a certain period of time. You would have to give detail as to what you believe that would look like and who would be doing that in the meantime and so forth. Okay, I think that is the quick scan A presentation in a nutshell. We spent about an hour and a half on this, so I think we're okay. And I'm going to take a last round of questions, and then I'm going to hand over to Larry to take us through the rest. Thank you. If you've got any questions, please put your hand up, and I'll call your name out. I've got Mandla. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's actually somebody's got a similar question in the chat, so maybe you'd want to also just check some of these chats to see if there are questions there. But it's about, you said you want equity 20% contribution. Now, if I get vendor financing, say I'm buying a building that I want to repurpose for social housing, and I get vendor financing, which would pretty much then I would be able to use as equity. I mean, would you look at that as equity contribution?
Okay, thank you. All right, so let me see if there are any other questions before I answer that one. Any other questions, anyone? Going once. Okay, Tammy, question.
On my side, I just wanted to understand the social housing. Will it be? Is it a project that one can look at on a property that falls within a tribal authority? It's owned by the tribe, but it's got its own title deed. It's a freestanding property.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other hands? All right. Okay, the question around Mandla, was, I think it was Manda. The question around equity is a very interesting one, because I think from what we've seen, probably 50 to 60% of applications fail because of the equity issue. Now, just to reiterate, equity can come in the form of hard cash, or it can be in the form of unencumbered, the unencumbered land that you plan to develop that is owned by you, that you want to use as equity in the project. You can also, however, at the same time, use other organizations to assist you in the funding of the equity portion of this as well. However, it all depends on the terms of that equity. Some institutions, for example, NEF, I'm just speaking off the cuff here, can provide certain funding that can be viewed as equity. But at the end of it all, it depends on what the terms are. So if you, I've got 2023, someone got at something, can you please just unmute, please can you mute your mic? And Susan as well, please can you just mute your mic as well?
Yeah.
Susan, please can you mute your mic?
Oh, okay. Is it okay now?
No, well, that's fine now.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So Mandla, yes, you. The answer to your question is that we have seen and know of situations where an entity has come up with their equity through financing from another institution. What's important is that financing should not be viewed as debt. If it comes as debt, or if the terms of that financing appear to be debt, or then it is not equity, and therefore doesn't qualify for the 20%. So there are institutions that are able to assist, even private individuals that are able to assist, but it all depends on the terms that are provided for that level of financing. And then the question to Tammy, and maybe Larry, maybe if you can come in just after I've answered Tammy about equity and whether what your experience is comes up with what you've seen. With regards to tribal land, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if the tribal land is in a restructuring zone, but one of the minimum investment criteria items is that the land would need to be in a restructuring zone. If it is in a restructuring zone, then I think the conversation can go forward from there. But if it's not in a restructuring zone, whether it's tribal land or not, it would need it most likely wouldn't qualify for social housing. Okay. I think that's it from my side, guys. Larry, is there anything from your side that you want to comment or say or?
Yeah. Thanks, Tinashe. Yes, I'm agreed on what is regarded as equity. It can't have strings attached, like it has to be repaid or it's secured over anything. It's got to be unencumbered cash and or land. So I see in the chat from Indomiso, is it allowed for the 20% equity to be in the form of a credit facility? No, if you're borrowing that money, if you're borrowing the money to put in the cash, that's also that wouldn't qualify as the cash equity that's needed. And the same with the vendor financing. would be the same. It's not the money owned by that entity that's being invested, or land that's being invested. You're going to have to repay it at some stage. Other questions we've got in the chat: is there a quota on the number of members of the entity who can be executive members? I'm not aware of any limit on that, but I know that there's a good review done on the makeup of the board, and you want to see a spread of skills. I think they were listed on one of the slides there. A good mix of development knowledge, of finance knowledge, of legal knowledge, of human resources, tenant management, community engagement. It must be a good spread. And whether they're executive or non-executive, I'm not aware of any restriction. But obviously, can only have so many people on the payroll, so you generally will have you'll have a mix of non-executive and executive members. Yeah. This question from Feroza. If my company is 100% owned by me and I have all the members in place, should all of them be registered on my business, or can I do an application with a SHRA? Difficult to answer that question directly without knowing a little bit more about it. But as far as I know, the ODAs, there's no restriction I'm aware of the shareholders of an ODA. So, and somebody from the SHRA can help me out here. Have you financed any companies who are 100% owned by one person, or does the makeup of the shareholding make a difference? Okay, so no response. I would say that would depend on the circumstances, Feroza.
Yeah, it's very much dependent. I think that we would need a little more context to provide clarity on that one. Yeah.
Okay. Here's another question about equity, using equity as land, and about permission from a rural area chief. I think this has got two aspects. This question would have two aspects to it. Yes, you can use equity as land, but you would have to have that as unencumbered land. It can't have any mortgage bonds against it, or bonds against it. And the other one, it would need to be in a restructuring zone with the way that things are at the moment. I'm not aware myself of anything that pertains to rural areas or tribal lands, if there's any difference there, but that would need to be taken up, I think, in the question and answer process with the SHRA itself. Right, the next one from Velile. SHRA keeps using the word delivery, who actually has a right to appoint the main contractor. How long it takes to SHRA to deliver grants to a bankable project? So the first part of that is the entity would be able to appoint the contractor, but there is an oversight process that goes around the development process. So you probably will find that would need approval from your assigned technical advisor. They would need to be happy that that contractor is going to be able to deliver the project. They would advise you. You get assigned a technical advisor when it comes to that kind of stuff. How long it takes the SHRA to deliver grants to a bankable project? Well, that's all in the communication between the entity and the SHRA and the information provision and all the steps that happen. So if everything's in place, there's no reason for it to be a long period. But if there are things that need to be in place that aren't done, then it does take a long time. Can a partnership agreement be accepted as ODA? Would probably need to know a little bit more about the circumstances there. So I think if you want to take that further, I think you'd need to consult somebody in the accreditation unit to give you advice about that. Any other questions in the chat? I think that's it. We have another hand up from Loiso. You'd like to ask a question, Loiso?
Yes, I don't know whether I put the cat in front of the horses here, but what I want to know is this equity thing apply in both social housing institution and ODA? Secondly, the issue of infrastructure. Who is responsible for funding the infrastructure in any development when it comes to social housing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can answer that one straight off, and others can chip in if they want to. The 20% applies to other delivery agents only. A social housing institution does not have to produce the 20% equity. So you will generally find that the social housing institutions are funded by the grant and a loan from the bank or NHFC. The 20%, as we'll see later today, the 20% extra does allow some variation in the products because you've got that much more to invest if you're an ODA investing, but we'll get to that level of detail in a later session. Who is responsible for infrastructure? Normally with the support that you need from local government, you might have an agreement with the municipality that they put in infrastructure up to your gate, and then the infrastructure inside the development is the responsibility of the entity developing it. So that's what I've seen, in terms of, that's why they're looking for support from local government, and you normally get the municipality to fund the bulk infrastructure that gets to your boundary. Okay, any other questions? I see there's one more in the chat. Do you guys fund student accommodation housing that is NSFAS accredited? I'm not aware of any link there because this is focused on affordability and income levels of tenants who want to live in the properties. So it generally would be working people or families, and I'm not sure about student accommodation if that falls within that definition.
God may be able to help with that.
Okay, thanks, Tanashin.
Done? Okay, that's fine. So yeah, I think then let's stick with that answer. All right, thanks. Thank you, guys.
Do we have another question? I see there's a hand up from Lisa.
No.
Okay, so yeah. Okay, thank you for that. I think just before we finish on Quick Scan A, we'll just do 10 minutes going through the Quick Scan A Excel template. There's not, in this abbreviated session, there's not time to go through and complete a Quick Scan A template. So we've just prepared some dummy information just to give you a feel around what goes on in the template. So I'm going to put that on the screen. Right, so Right, so here's one that's already been partially completed. In fact, no, I've done another one that's got yeah, okay. I've done this one that just covers a slightly wider field. So you will get the template will have everything in yellow. But then if you enter something in there, it turns to a clear background. And some of them have got lists in that you can choose. You can choose what you've got. This dummy has been done with an ODA in mind. Now the Excel spreadsheet you get has got a sheet for company information. It's got a sheet for data. This is data about the projects, mostly about the projects and about your operations. And then it's got an assessment area. Without information in, we can't see what, we haven't got an example of what qualifies and what doesn't qualify. That's done intentionally because, you want to do it the way you say you're going to do it, and then you'll need to see how to get around it if you're not meeting the criteria. So there are there are measures, there are performance measures here, which is your target, good or poor, and you meet those, but we're not going to go through all of those. Those can be in another session when we actually get to the detail of what goes in there. And then there are lots of other fields that you don't get involved with. It's the workings, here's the results on financial performance, and here's a thing on critical KPIs. There's a reduced number of critical KPIs you have to meet. Those can all be covered when we do a detailed session on this, and there'll be graphs as well, which give information like that. So and then there'll be some guidance on what's acceptable attachments. So if we just quickly go through how you would start off your assessment. So there's a checklist here. What have I provided? If I've done these, you would just put in a yes there, or if it's something still outstanding, you might just say it's outstanding. So, you just go through and click in it, and if you need to make any comments, you make comments there. When it comes to company information, into your company, you provide these details that you need. A PBO registration number, that would be more for the SHIs. The social housing institutions should all register as a public benefit organization, because then you get a company tax exemption. But it's going to be more difficult for ODAs to justify that unless you are set up with public benefit in mind. But if you are an entity providing housing on a sort of market-related rentals, but you want to include some social housing into your projects or have a few social housing projects, you won't be a public benefit organization, but you would still qualify for the grant. So you just complete all this information. I've just done this as just picked any of these items here. So you could have, in this case, it's me, myself, 100%. One person, one director. You would generally have more information entered here, but this just shows you the fields you need to populate. Then you answer questions about the accreditation. Obviously, your first one, you would answer no to accreditation, but that hopefully will change as you go through the processes. So that's the first part. It's a company information, which is very easy. And then we've got the data. So you'd fill in your information about existing projects first. You enter your current year there, and your forecast year is 5 year. It's a 5-year forecast period that you have to include information in your quick scan A. So that forecast year is current year plus 5. You go through, you follow the prompts to enter that information. Then you break down your development into type. In this case, we're doing new build greenfields, 3 to 4 story walk-ups. We're doing all 2 beds. You'll probably normally have a mix there. 10-year types. In this case, we're saying we're doing 100 social housing, 32 rental units, total units 132. We're managing them all ourselves, owned and managed ourselves. Then we've got the rental bands. Now these rental bands, we've taken the percentages that come from the quick scan C. To qualify for the CCG, you need to have a spread of rentals. Somebody's having a chat in the background. Please turn off your mic. Okay. Don't know who it is, but thank you. We can't hear you any longer. So you've got to have a spread of your rental bands, and then that implies across your income bands as well. So now we're up to 22,000, from 1850 to 22,000. These are in the primary market. Remember, we've got to have 30% in the primary market. So our primary market is from 1850 to 6,700 income. And then we've got more breakdown. In this case, we're saying we've got 100 restructuring capital grant and 132 unsubsidized on the basis if this is a mixed project. Then we talk about projects under construction. So that our first project we listed in there, if that's on the ground going to happen or happening. Here's our second project under construction. We've called it Second 200. John, I think we just need to attend to this. The province doesn't give us the right drop down. Yeah, and whoever's in charge of the template should just try and adjust that one. And then, so it's the same kind of breakdown we had before. Then we've got planned projects, which are further down the pipeline. So this one, that other one, we said we're starting development 1st of January 24, finishing 18 months later, June 25. Yeah, we're saying that this one's further down the line, starting January 25, finishing June 26. And when we do a financial year, yeah, it's not these years aren't financial years, these are calendar years. So just be aware of that. So we enter that same information. Then we have to also put that information into the forecast. Now the forecast runs from right to left in the same way they're doing financial statements nowadays. It's illogical to me, but that's how it's done. I always like to work left to right, but this is what it is. And you've got to take that information you've entered above, tell them when you're getting those new units. So our new projects of 200 and 300 units come in later years. And then there's quite a lot of more detailed information. You take this from your financial plan, what your costs of your different services are in your operations. And then you take an extract from your income statement, income from rental, property sales, other income sources. Then you've got your direct operating costs, maintenance, other direct costs. You've got your overheads of running the company, staff salaries and such. Right, and then you've got information about your loan repayments. You've got some balance sheet information you will enter. This you would take from your financial plan. So your 5-year forecast in your financial plan. You're lucky doing 5-year forecasts. I'm working in the UK at the moment. Yeah, we have to do 30-year forecasts every year. I don't know why they make them suffer that much to do a 30-year forecast every year. So yeah, all this stuff comes from your financial forecast. Also very important, debtors age analysis is a very good indicator of how the company is being run. If you've got long outstanding debtors, it's a very bad sign. So this carries high emphasis in how a company is managed. Then details of all your staff and details of your governance, the directors and such, all the different skills in your directors, and that should take care of that. And then that information all feeds into the assessment stuff, but that is for another day. Any questions before we have another break? Okay, no more questions. One more, yeah. Lazola. Yeah, you can ask your question.
Thank you, Larry. Larry? Yes, Larry. No, just, I just want to ask, would it be possible that you could, we could send us that tool? It would be lovely to play with it while you're actually giving the presentation. Thanks.
You want to go back to the quick scan A to play around, okay?
Yes, but to have it on my side.
Yeah, to have it on your side. It's going to come to you. I know that it's going to be circulated. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know when it's going to be circulated, but it will be circulated. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, please ask your question.
There's a question from Tabo and the next one from Naledi.
Okay.
Morning. One question: if your accreditation expires, do you have to start this whole process all over again for you to get accreditation? And then also the follow-up question: if you have accreditation, what would be the next step, or are you still coming to that? Maybe on the future presentation, you're gonna touch on that. Those are my questions.
Okay, thanks, Tabo. I'll answer your question straight away before we take the next one. If you've got accreditation, you take credit for what you got. So if it's conditional, you top it up. If it's expired, I'm answering for the SRA, yeah, but I would imagine you would have to do the whole lot again. But you could probably copy a lot that you got from your first application into your new application. Do we have any definitive answer from anyone from the SRA to that question? Yeah, but I do know that when you've got accreditation, Tabo, you keep that accreditation, and you would only lose it if something has happened that is a reason for the SRA to then decide that you're not meeting the criteria. But when you've got accreditation, you then only need, when you do applications for funding, you only need to then do the project technical and the project financial, the quick scan B and C. So your quick scan A is one big piece of work at the start to get accreditation. Any more questions before we have some tea?
Okay, so my question was around the holding period for that rental stock. I see you're doing a 5-year forecast. So does that mean that you need to keep that rental stock for 5 years in order for you to qualify for the grant?
No, the period you need to keep that is much longer. The 5-year forecast is just because, you should always be doing a 5-year forecast in your business plan. The period you keep the project units for is a lot longer, and I think there's a penalty applied if you dispose of those units then you have to repay the subsidy on a calculation basis. 30 years is what I have in mind, from what I recall, but I would have to check up on that. But it's a long period. These units are long term.
Thank you.
Does that help?
Yeah, that does. Thanks.
Lazola, a question?
My question maybe might just be directed at Shra, but maybe Larry, you might know. Can one use that property against a bond, the developed product?
As part of your financing, you would have to put the development forward for security anyway. So your lender would most likely take a bond on the property. I don't think it's allowed to then use that property as security for another project. I think you would be pulled to order for doing that, by the lending companies firstly, and secondly by the SHRA.
But I'm saying in a situation where, if you do, I mean, when you do take out finance on the property, you then finish paying it off, the loan, and now I'm saying it's unencumbered at that moment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, then your lender wouldn't object because your lender has been repaid. They would have released the mortgage bond. I don't know what the SHRA's view would be to that. I don't think the SHRA has existed long enough to to have properties on long-term financing paid off. Yeah, I think that would be a question for the SHRA. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break this time, and we come back at 10:20. Sorry, 11:20 your time. Yeah. Okay, can we reconvene 11:20?
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, everybody, it's 10:20. Are we ready to go? Okay,
Good to go. Good to go. Yeah.
Excellent. Right. So the next, thanks Tinashe for that very entertaining show you gave us about the quick scan A. Now we're going to get to some technical stuff for the quick scan B. And so I'll be taking us through the slides on the quick scan B, and we'll have times when you can ask questions as well. So we've got 1 hour and 40 before we are due to finish. Let's see where we are after 1 hour, and then we see if we need another break or if we're going to push through. But I don't like to do anything longer than 1 hour because concentration goes. So this is the quick scan B. So it's also an Excel template that you've got to fill in, but we're not going to go into that now because that's a whole, that's a whole level of detail and sort of a case study would need to be done when there's more time. But for now, we're just taking you through the different sections that get examined with a quick scan B and the technical feasibility of the projects. So we're focusing on the project now, not on the entity. We're done with the entity. So the technical feasibility is the analysis of the economic, regulatory, and technical viability of a project. And we also need to make sure that all those fundamental building blocks are in place, starting with regulatory approval. You know, nobody can build anything without any town planning approval. In this case, the extra regulations, the restructuring zone. We need to confirm your land ownership or your rights to develop, town planning approvals, environmental authorizations. So these need a whole lot of studies done as well if we starting from scratch with a project. So that all goes in, that information all gets entered into QuickScan B. So here's a picture of some fairly dodgy building blocks. So your technical advisor would probably throw a fit if he saw your building like this. So this is how the SHRA deals with the project. So the SHRA uses its mandate to develop social housing using delivery agents. Those delivery agents are either social housing institutions or other delivery agents, ODAs. Mandates dependent on the type of building and the location, obviously inside the restructuring zone. The beneficiaries who are going to be the tenants living in these are earning between 1850 and 22,000 a month. That was recently updated this year. Over time, those of us who've been in social housing from the start, upper limit was 3,500 when it started. So inflation has taken care of the limits, and we've had to keep pace with that. So that's the beneficiary classifications. The primary is from 1850 to 6,700, and secondary is from, and you've got to have at least 30% in your primary, as we mentioned. But we'll keep repeating that just in case somebody needs to be reminded. So the criteria, you've got minimum investment criteria, and those are various indicators that you'll become aware of. And we use the quick scan A, B, and C to evaluate the agents and the developers and the projects. So the minimum investment criteria must be rental stock, medium to high density, must have qualifying beneficiaries in the target income range of 1850 to 22,000 per month. It must have minimum 30% primary beneficiaries, maximum of 70% secondary beneficiaries. You can have mixed projects, so but those won't get grant. You know, you can have projects where if you're developing 150 units and you have 100 social housing units and you have 50 market rental units or market sale units, those 50 units are separate from this assessment that's been done. We're only assessing the social housing component of the projects, and that's the focus. The other stuff will also be assessed as part of your business plan, because if you're going to go and develop market sale at a loss, well, then it definitely affects your social housing operations. So you need to make sure that your other operations are going to be profitable enough to not harm your organization. Very important, it must be in a restructuring zone. There's been lots more restructuring zones that have been approved over the years. So if the project that you're interested in is not in a current restructuring zone, then you would need to mobilize all the different agencies at various levels of government to have that area declared a restructuring zone. And generally they'll have to be areas with good transport links, with a high density of population, and lots are for infill, filling in gaps in existing residential areas that aren't already restructuring zones. That's a good reason also to declare that area restructuring zone. So you might need to start from scratch of getting your area declared a restructuring zone. Much easier if you already have that. And then you must have the support and commitment from your municipality and or provincial government. Yeah. Okay. The units must be self-contained with a minimum size of 30 square meters. This year's change in the subsidy level has come along in the form of a circular from Department of Human Settlements. In it, they referred to, we might open the gates to have nano units, which are smaller units. I think it's 18 to 25 square meters. But that's not been promulgated yet in any publication that carries weight like the SHRA, like the social housing regulations that govern social housing. So that's just something to think of for the future. So that minimum size might be adapted. The social housing institution must be, or other delivery agent must be conditionally or fully accredited. Conditionally accredited would be if you've fulfilled most of the key criteria and you've still got a few things outstanding. Full accreditation comes when you fulfill all of those. These are 28 categories of information. If you're other delivery agent, you must demonstrate that 20% your ability to contribute 20% of the equity of the project. So if the project's 100 million rand, you've got to contribute 20 million rand. The project has to be ready in terms of the project readiness criteria. Those you'll find out what those are down the line. And everything needs to be in place before the consideration for funding with a grant. They don't want anything left hanging in suspense, because there's no assurance that that's definitely going to happen. So let's move on to the location. So as we've said, it's got to be in a restructuring zone, designated and gazetted by the Minister of Human Settlements in terms of the Social Housing Act. More than 100 in Gauteng, and there are many more spread through the rest of the country as well. If it's a mega project, I'm not sure what constitutes a mega project, but it should be aligned with the municipal requirements and confirmed as such by them. Here's a little map of a restructuring zone. It looks like a coastal restructuring zone. It looks like a eThekwini. And there's that's obviously land which is on the northern side of eThekwini. I would imagine that's near the airport somewhere. So it's got all the transport links. It's got already built up area that's there. So that's just one example. Okay, about the project location, it's got to have national and provincial ministerial approval, municipal approval, town planners confirmation that the zoning's right, confirmation that it's in a UDZ, then it's got to be within a spatial development framework of social, economic and transformational aspects. Lots of the infill projects would probably satisfy that requirement. It's got to be environmentally sustainable. So the green building things are coming in more and more. things such as heat pumps. And that's also mentioned in the circular that refers to the increase in the income levels for the subsidy. And then the technologies that are used should ensure environmental sustainability. So green is becoming a big thing and becoming more mainline. As we mentioned, it must be near transport links. So the links around Joburg especially, Gauteng, are these corridor developments. I know that the council had a nice map at one stage of their targeted areas for corridors, and they called each one with a different name. So this fits in with that program, and generally will be along the main transport routes. Just another picture of what the main transport routes look like. This one bottom left here would be your social housing project. You can see those are 3 or 4 story walk-ups right next to a big main road where people can get easy access to work. Okay, any questions at this stage? So we'll continue. Yeah, one. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I see you gave an example of restructuring zones in Gauteng.
Yeah.
And I think most of the projects are also happening in Gauteng and less in other provinces. I just want to check what is the status of other provinces with regard to the restructuring zones, and also maybe to check, because I think to be a restructuring zone, I think is a process that needs to be initiated by municipalities. And
Yes.
yeah, I'm in Limpopo. I see municipalities struggling with the process of declaring their areas to be restructuring zones. I don't know whether it's an issue of capacity or are they not interested. Why not the minister or national government look into potential areas and declare them restructuring zones? I'm from an area where there's SEZ, for example, 2 SEZs in Limpopo. There are a lot of activities that are taking place, and those areas are not restructuring zones. They are happening in towns like Mosina and Bakersford. So there's a huge need of social housing in those areas, but they are not restructuring zones. What you will find is that there are these PHDS, whatever, which is necessarily not restructuring zones. But to get into the process of being gazetting, it seems to be a problem to most municipalities. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. I think that sounds to me like it needs some mobilization to get people moving in the various levels of government. Is there anyone from the SHRA on the call? Is this something that the SHRA could help with?
Yeah, Larry, it's one of those challenges actually when you look at the manner in which the program is performing, and it's quite skewed. The gentleman is correct that a lot of our delivery happens in Gauteng, and one of the reasons that you see this skewness is exactly because some provinces sit with very little restructuring zones, Limpopo being a point in case. And because of the length it takes for that process to get restructuring zones gazetted by the minister, it does hinder in terms of the performance of the program in other provinces as well. I know for a fact that when you go into provinces such as Northern Cape, we've just recently worked with a province to try and assess the demand as maybe a starting point to say what is the likelihood of social housing flying in the province in areas such as Katu, Kuruman, and so forth, which are currently not gazetted as restriction zone. So that work has to happen both by municipality and the province, and the SHRA can provide the support. However, the responsibility of getting this off the ground really sits with the municipality. Municipality has to assess and say, this in terms of our development priorities, this is the area or areas that we would want to earmark for structural zones. So yeah, it is that process, and I mean, we can avail contacts with of officials at national whose process it is to support municipalities and provinces in getting this process and applications off the ground. But there's much as we can do as a SHRA.
Okay, well, thanks for that, John. There, Mr. Maligwe, we have a route to getting some more support, but not an answer yet. Yeah. Would that help you?
Yeah, no, that's okay. That sounds fair.
So
Thank
I think
you.
if you can make contact, then probably with John afterwards to get those contact details of somebody at national government. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, anyone else got a question?
There's a hand from Velile. You want to come through, Velile? Just unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. I've just tabled some few questions and I've forwarded through the chat. Can you respond to them?
Okay, let me just have a look in the chat. Okay, Velile, there you go. These, where do you start? You start here with that one. Can you explain this if SHRA issues 65% and 20% equity issued by the ODA? We should issue the remaining 15%. That would be a loan from a finance institution. If you know, the funding formula isn't really based on percentages, it's a fixed amount. So now you're up to 426,308, which is a massive number. And hopefully you'll be getting more than that. Hopefully that percentage will be more than the 65%. So you'll need to borrow less. You'll see in the example that we use later. In some cases, you might not even need to borrow, depending if you keep your development costs in check. So yes, that would be bank lending for the 15% or NHFC lending. Can you explain the town planning process and how long it will take us? Yeah, that's that would, you'd have your zoning to be done. These things do take a long time. They take years rather than months. So it all depends how effective your local town planning department is at the municipality. But if you haven't had the area zoned yet for medium or high density residential, then you would still have a long way to go. You do have to be zoned for medium to high residential. I hope that answers the middle part. Our project is in a restructuring zone, but the town planning is troubling us. We are advised to design as well as bulk services infrastructure before town planning design can be approved. Well, I would hope you don't have to pay for the bulk services infrastructure. You would normally expect the municipality to pay for bulk services infrastructure to your gate, to your boundary. And then you would do the internal infrastructure as part of your project. That would be yes, you would have to engage your municipality about that. So Do those answer your questions there, Velile? You still there, Velile?
Yes, you did very well. We are in a restructuring zone, but
Okay.
the challenge is that down there's no service park infrastructure, so we have to redesign it. Yes, to meet the new project. At the moment, it's just hostels, old hostels, 3 of them, and we have to redesign it.
Yeah.
So we're scared that this could be very expensive exercise.
Yes, if you've got to pay for the bulk services coming to your boundary, yes, that's not really fair from the municipality. That's their function. Can I ask you which town you're in, which city you're in?
Yeah, I'm based in Katlehong. The project, the area is in Katlehong.
The
Do you know
Katlehong
the
area, okay.
shopping center, Tuli Shopping Center? Yes, same to shopping mall. We have just been supported by the local municipality to do it. It's just behind the mall. So,
okay.
Yeah, it's a huge job, and but they are responding. I've been visiting.
Oh, that's good.
City planning,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it does take some, from where you are now, it does take some time, yeah. Okay. Right, I see we have a question from Tabo about when does one have to do a project fact sheet? Hello?
No, I think the stage where we are in now, it's an inception stage. I don't know, am I putting it right? But we are trying, to give a little bit of money to make sure that we are drawing the plan, the town plan, the first one. And we've done that, and we've submitted it, but we're asked to do the services design. So we are battling our way through to do that, because we are trying to pull the services into the project area.
Yeah.
There are no services down. There are no services down. And the fact that we're going to demolish and build is going to take us a lot of money. And our area is 52 hectares. 52 hectares, we're looking at more than 3,000 units. So, yeah, we are there.
Well,
thanks for
you've got a long way to go. Yeah.
I think that question was actually meant for you. At what stage does one have to do a project fact sheet, or maybe rather for the car unit to answer? I don't know if anyone from the car unit from the SHA is still available on the call.
Yeah, it's really one of the first steps. So at the point that you want to bring in a project, I think this is the first document that you'd be requested to populate. And I think there's a need, there would be a request for you to add to that a few supporting documents. I must apologize, we've lost 2 of our colleagues whose process it is, but they will be joining us, and we might just perhaps bring more a fuller answer on the chat line later on. But it's the first step that you engage at the process of registering a project into the pipeline. Hope that helps.
Thank you, John. Yeah. Okay, should we proceed? Right. Okay, so getting to show your project readiness. So you should provide confirmation, in principle, approval of debt funding. So that's if you're needing any debt funding, you need to get a letter from a financing institution to say that they've been approached and they are in principle able to finance you. Obviously, they're not putting themselves on the line because you would have to go through a whole lot of their criteria and applications to get financing, but you can only show intention to finance at this stage. So you should provide confirmation of a land ownership or land offer to purchase or land availability agreement. So that's the second step. You should provide confirmation that your town planning approvals are in place. Or so those who are starting with land that has not yet been zoned for this need to get that done. Talk to your town planning friends to get that through the municipality. Environmental authorization. There's the whole environmental process, which you need to get approval for. Make sure you're not developing where there's a endangered type of mouse or endangered type of butterfly or something. So you need to get an environmental specialist to give you an EIA, environmental impact assessment. And then confirmation by the municipality that the bulk services capacity is efficient for the project, or in Valile's place, confirmation that they will finance the bulk services capacity. Yeah, and put a timeline to it as well. Yeah, I think that for 3,000 units, Valile, there'll have to be a lot of bulk services coming to your boundary. So that's going to be a big cost for the municipality. But they'll get it all back, all services and rates. Right, next part of project readiness is confirm that the project concept is responsive to the local demand. So you need to do a market study, a demand study. And you'd need it to be current because things do change over time. So you can't pull out one from 15 years ago. You'd need to have it updated if you've done one in years before. Being an advanced stage of development with the site development plan, having done a traffic impact study, as well as a geotechnical report for greenfields projects, and structural integrity report for refurb jobs in brownfield projects. Then you need to have appointed a professional team with the relevant qualifications and experience, and these must also meet BBBEE requirements. And you should provide a development cost estimate and bill of quantities. Okay, that's further down the line, but you do need to be that far down the line to have to start the process, to have any imminent conclusion to the process. Right, what are our municipal provincial requirements? We need a municipal letter confirming that it's a restructuring zone. We need to look at the specific requirements. You need to have identified the earth number, the number of units, whether it's aligned with the Integrated Development Plan or SPF, that there's bulk services availability. Who's paying for the bulk services? Hopefully the municipality is going to pay for all of it, but you might have to make a contribution to it, and that would have to be added into your development cost. And then you need a letter from the municipality specifically mentioning that they support your project. From the provincial department, you need a letter of support. That's also got to identify your property. The two have to be able to be linked. You're going to mention the project steering committee where the project was discussed and approved. So you need minutes of the provincial steering committee meeting where it was approved. Confirm the amount of the provincial institutional support grant. Okay, so that's this with the new structure of the funding. That's falling away, but it's all included in the main grant that you get. And then confirm that any additional funding from the province is going to be allocated to the project. Okay, if we move to your demand study, the demand market study investigates opportunities, threats, weaknesses, and strengths of the proposed development by looking into the population in the areas, the trends, and the projected growth. Also looking at age, demographics, and target market and income statistics. So you want to make sure that you've got people earning within those designated salary bands between 1,850 and 22,000, that there are enough within that income band to qualify for your scheme. They don't already have other accommodation. Right. What is property development? So from the time of looking for a site or a site looking for an idea, through development and through handing over the asset to the management company or the management part of your development. So if you're all doing it on the same company, you'll have a property development division and you'll have a management division. So the one will hand over to the other. Well, there are some social housing institutions who have a specialist development entity in the group, and they then hand that over to a management company in the same group. There are benefits to doing that from a financial point of view, principally being that the development company can get a VAT refund if you've structured your group properly. And the VAT refund would be based on the amount of the grant in relation to the costs of the development as a whole. But that discussion is for another time. So let's go through the property development process. So at inception, we're following the red arrow, not feasible. Well, then you're obviously going to drop the project. Going to the yellow arrow, it's feasible. Yep, let's refine the idea. Go to the red arrow, not feasible, drop the project. Is it feasible? We'll go to a feasibility study. If we can't turn that into binding contracts, we then we enter into formal commitments. So this is having established that the project is going to be feasible, technically feasible, and that the initial high-level numbers stack up. We can then start going to the next steps where we go to stage 5, formal commitment, all your documents in place, your approval with the SHRA. Then stage 6 will be construction, and stage 7 will be use of the asset. So you may then managing the asset and the portfolio. Site identification, is it greenfield or brownfield? Greenfield's a term used for land that's not been used before and has been earmarked for development. Brownfield means land that's previously been used for development become vacant or derelict. Lots of inner city redevelopment has been done on this basis. So generally inner city will generally be brownfields and other areas will be greenfields normally. And your infill might be either greenfields or brownfields depending what was on the site. So your brownfield sites need to be assessed by environmental consultants as well before they can be developed. And also a structural integrity report or building condition audit that's been undertaken by an engineer or a quantity surveyor. If you're taking over an existing property, analysis of the current tenants and the lease agreements must be analyzed, because there might be terms in the lease agreement that limit what you can do once you take over that area. Okay, looking at project viability, the highest and best use. As in all things property, location is important. Establish that the property exists and easily accessible to close to amenities. It's got a structural integrity report for brownfields. It's got a geotech report for greenfields. You don't want to be developing where you've got sinkholes or underground issues that need different kinds of foundations, or in some cases should not be built on for any reason. And you need to consider your surrounding areas. So it's got to fit all of those criteria to be the highest and best use of that land. Next, is it legally possible? So it's the type of ownership, whether it's by land availability agreement, outright purchase, or a period term land lease. It's got to have a title deed. That's got to be in the name of the company or going to be transferred into the name of the company applying for the funding. No servitudes that may impact on the value of the property. Is the property in the restructuring zone? Letters of support and commitment from municipality and provincial government. Town planning, is the zoning right? And is the property development in line with the zoning scheme? SDP and building plans approved, spatial development plan. Is there a heritage issue? You know, are the buildings over 60 years, in which case the heritage people get involved? And do you have vacant occupation, or do you have to deal with existing tenants? Right. Moving on to the technically possible field. So the design concept and sustainability. Are the building specs and requirements ready? We must have self-contained units. That's a requirement for social housing. There must be self-contained units. And we're not yet sure if anything's going to come out about the nano units, if they can have shared facilities. But generally, places with sort of letting rooms with a shared bathroom would not have qualified for social housing grants. So it's got to be a self-contained unit, either even if it's a studio flat, it's got to have its own bathroom and own kitchen or kitchenette. Architects and engineers drawings. It must be in a medium to high density residential rental. Professional team must have qualifications and experience. So you'll list all your professional teams when you get to doing that part of it. Who they are and what they're qualified as. Alignment with municipality housing plan, bulk services availability, and any contributions that you need to pay to the municipality must be included in your development costs. The internal services are to be done by the developer, which is the social housing institution or ODA. The professionals must be registered with professional bodies with valid PI covers. You'll have to get documents to prove those in your file that you submit. Professional team appointed with JBCC and or BHCO or proxy agreements. Those must be signed. For the construction program, you get a project implementation plan in place, like a Gantt chart. You must have a procurement and contracting strategy. You must have demands. There must be demand study. We've spoken about the market demand, and you must prove demand for social housing. You must cater for primary and secondary markets. You must cater for income bands of that which we know already. And you must have approved spatial development plan and building plans. So that's the technical part. So we've covered legally possible, technically possible, now it's financially possible. Is the property reasonably priced and supported? Is this supported by a valuation report? Yeah, this brings me to another interesting point about social housing. Generally, we have found that social housing was not feasible where you had to buy the land. You needed the land to be made available by the council at low or nominal or low cost. If you're buying property at market-related price, you are at an immediate disadvantage on the cost and affordability basis. But with the other delivery agents, they would generally not have access to this land that's available to social housing institutions. So you would have to buy your land or buy the existing building. But the fact that you're contributing 20% equity means that you probably are able to absorb that cost, because the constraining factor on your long-term financing is your long-term debt and your debt repayments. And generally, we have found that you can finance those loans out of your operations if you're borrowing up to 100,000 Rand. If you are borrowing more than 100,000 Rand, you're putting your project under pressure financially. So that's something important to remember when you're doing your project viability. So the consolidated capital grant is approved at 328. Oh, I missed that one. That's now 426,308. Yeah, I missed that. So apologies for that. 426,308. There you have it. That's from the circular that came from National Department. The term, you're going to have a term sheet from your debt funder. Proof of unencumbered equity of 20%. We've spoken about you needing the cash. Right, your operating cost. Okay, well, everyone has different operating costs. Generally the private sector would have lower operating costs than the social housing institutions. You're not as focused on the social impact and all of that. So that would that we're finding that we're using a norm of 1,600 nowadays with inflation. The price per unit was 460, but that's inflation has taken care of that. So with building inflation in building materials is insane. I heard from somebody the other day who says they're able to have a price. The cost per unit is 530 nowadays, and they're a very efficient builder. So they would be they're looking at 530 excluding that. Social housing institutions generally aren't able to claim the VAT, so that needs to be your top line if you're a social housing institution. If you're an other development agent, you could go above that because you're going to be able to reclaim your VAT under certain circumstances. Qualifying beneficiaries are these. I had updated that properly, thank goodness. Target market 30% primary, 70% secondary. The primary market is up to 6,700, but those income bands on the QSA are still set at these kind of bands. We might need to reconsider adjusting those bands in the quick scan A, but these are what the quick bands are in the quick scan A. Very important. Who knows what the DSCR is short for? That's the ratio for debt service cover. And okay, we have a hand. Yeah, Lazola. Was that going to be your answer? DSCR is debt service cover, and that must be 1.3 to 1. So that means your cash flow from operations must be 30% more than your loan repayments. The bottom part of that factor is loan repayments, and the top part is cash flow from operations. So it's your rental income less your operating costs. And you must be able to cover your loan repayments by 1.3, not just your interest, but your whole loan repayment by 1.3. And that's often the most difficult criteria to meet. But there's a fairly strong correlation between people who don't meet that 1.3 debt service cover and those who go into financial distress. So that's why the SHRA will be looking at that ratio like a hawk. You know, they will be very strong about that. So you must allow for a vacancy factor, take into account your local things. I think we're building a combined bad debt and vacancy factor of 7% into our calculations, but that's got to depend on your local conditions. So your development cost must include other fees and contingency, NHBR fees, capitalized interest. Your internal rate of return must be a minimum of prime overdraft rate plus 4.5%. Also, that's giving you a buffer on top of, you know, of covering your financing repayments. You must have a maintenance reserve of at least 1.02% of development cost. You must have internal and you must have property management for internal and external. So management of your property management rules must cover internal arrangements and the external environment. SWOT analysis, and you must have a risk analysis. So that all goes under the financial feasibility, which is partially looked at in QuickScan B, but mainly looked at under the QuickScan C when it comes to project viability. And then it must be socially possible. So it must alleviate the housing shortage, and there must be job creation. Must look at social housing beneficiaries in that income zone we're talking about. Families live there, so we want play areas. Everyone includes swings and roundabouts and things for kids to play on. There's a minimum size and self-contained. Muted me, okay. Since when last was I muted? Is anyone still there? Right, Velile, yes, you got a question.
Hi, Larry, proceed. I'm just not sure. We're trying to mute this person.
Okay.
I think we've disabled her mic for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you'd had enough of me, so you'd muted me. But thanks. Thanks for giving me the mic back. Okay, so would be socially possible. Right. Now let's go to more practical sort of stuff. So there's just an example that's been used as an example here as an earth in Bertram's, measuring 4,000 square meters, strategically located, easily accessible, near to Ria Vaya bus station, as well as other amenities and transport routes, and falls under the Greater Ellis Park precinct, earmarked as a priority area for development by the JDA. Currently, the area is currently under urban renewal, and yeah, so we've been driving through that area for a long time and seeing how things are going there. So some dimensions of that particular unit, the zoning information, 4,000 square meters, residential 4, floor ratio of 1.8, coverage, the building covers 45% of the site, it's 4 stories, so it still doesn't need a lift. Parking ratio, half a parking bay per dwelling unit or 1 parking bay per 2 units. Building line within 5 meters of the street boundaries. Looking at that, we've got to allow 20% efficiency, 30% of the units for the primary target market, and should be 33 square meters, 70% for the secondary market and bigger at 48 square meters. Questions for consideration. Using the highest and best use, calculate the number of units this development will yield and the number of parking bays. So you would have advice from that from your professionals, how many units you could get in there. And you'd probably run a few iterations of those. And then would you say the proposed development's legally possible in terms of the approved zoning? So this then translated into some figures for development costs, which I'm assuming all came from that, but I've now gone and updated those development costs and seen what's possible with the new grant of 426,300. So I've done this analysis for an SHI without VAT registration. I've done it for an SHI with VAT registration, so where they get the VAT back. I've also, on the next slide, we're doing that for an ODA, assuming the ODA is VAT registered. And so let's just start with the social housing institution. This gets a bit technical, and it gets a bit, so you need to concentrate on the key things here. And I've highlighted those key items with these two arrows. The total development costs, including VAT. Without VAT registration, you can fund a development of 526,300. I've arrived at that by saying your subsidy is 426,300 plus 100,000 loan. So the most that we should be spending on the per unit should be 426 plus 100 is 526,300. That's the number that's there. So if it's 132 units, it will be nearly 70 million. If we get VAT registration, we can push that development cost up to 587,000, because when we've reclaimed the VAT, we're going to be back at a net cost of 526, which is our subsidy plus 100,000 provision for loan. So do you see the distinction there, that VAT registration allows you a significant benefit in terms of what you can put into the unit? Then you can put the things in that people like, all the green stuff and all of that. So that's one important aspect, and we can turn that benefit there into the construction. I've just used the construction line as the balancing item. So in this example, now these aren't real figures, these are just, they are, taken from the previous example and just inflated to fit with the current environment. So yeah, we can spend 288,000 on construction per unit. But if we had VAT registration, we would be able to spend up to 341,000. That's you see, we can actually make a much nicer unit. Then just one slight technical aspect on the VAT. We'd be paying VAT at 15%. I've assumed we're paying the VAT at 15% on everything. Using contractors, not using our own labor, in other words. But then the claim is limited to the relationship between the subsidy, which is a zero-rated VAT supply, and the total development costs. So you see there, in terms of this with VAT registration, we were paying 75,000 per unit on VAT. That was included in the payments we made to our contractors, but we're claiming 61,000. So our net VAT cost is 14,000 per unit, but it was 67,000 per unit VAT cost if we were not registered. Okay, we can go through that in case studies and help people when they're doing this kind of stuff down the line, but this is meant to be high level. If we translate that now to an ODA, the ODA with the extra 20% of the development cost invested, you can go to a higher figure. So if you don't have a loan, in this case, you would be able to fund the entire project with subsidy and your 20%. You wouldn't need a loan. So the left-hand column here is ODA without a loan. Same thing, you'd be paying 75,000 VAT, you'd be recovering 61,000. If you get a loan, you can really increase how much you spend on the unit, because that extra 20% allows you you can add in another 20% onto your cost. So you can go and develop up to a VAT inclusive cost 691,000, VAT exclusive 631,000. So it effectively gives you another 100,000 on top of what you would have spent. And you can have much nicer units if you want to stretch yourself to the maximum affordability. Any questions to that very difficult piece to explain? It was quite a complicated calculation. Do we have any questions?
I'm not picking up any questions. Well, Velile's got one. Yeah.
Okay. Now, Velile? Yeah. Is Velile just saying hi, or is he going to ask a question? Who else is asking questions? And Mabandla.
Yes.
Who wants to go first?
Yes. It's Mabandla speaking.
Hello, Mabandla. Yes.
Hi. Sorry, I just want to take a step back and just confirm a few things. The debt service cover ratio.
Yes.
You mentioned that is calculated against the cash flow from operations. That would be the net cash flow from operations.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Rental less operating costs and overheads and yeah.
And then
except your interest cost would not be deducted from that, because your interest cost is part of the bottom part of that formula, part of your repayments.
Yes, it would be calculated against EBITDA, which is before interest.
Yes,
just things before interest. And tax and all of those other things. And then in as far as the IRR is concerned, in the currently prevailing environment, the IRR is prime plus 4.5%. So we are in an environment where things are quite volatile at the moment, and the interest rates are it's a question of how long is a piece of string, and nobody really knows. We thought we're now reached the peak, but on the basis of current events, nobody really knows what's going to happen, because inflation, which is So if we do we have to adjust the IRR calculation every single time before submission is there sort of like a lag that perhaps applicants can be allowed? For example, I submit this week and then next week interest rates change. When does that follow through to the consideration side of things? I don't know if you can understand my question.
And I do, Mabandla. You would only be able to work with what information you would have at the time of doing the submission. So when you do your quick scan C, you'd have to put in the prevailing rates at that time. If the project assessment was done a month later and they just had decided to increase the rates again, well, I'm not sure if the SHRA would ask you to resubmit a different one, but I think you could only enter at the time of applying what the rates are then.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Who else? Velile, are you with us? Is Velile? Okay, Velile, your turn.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yeah, can hear you.
Yes. I've sent my questions through the chat. Can you respond to them?
Okay. Are we allowed to move the name of the project to newly registered? Let's see where the top, where were your questions? Wow, there are lots more questions in the chat. Wow. Okay. We might need to respond to these a bit later, Velile. There's now hundreds of questions here. Or should we go through them? Because I think everyone will be interested in the answers as well. So let's right, I think we've answered these. Quite a number of members. Now we've done that. Those have been answered. Delivery we've answered. Student accommodation's been done. I think with fact sheet we've answered that. I think it's the next one. Notice that the land lease document shows the same requirements from the SHRA. Tell me, in this case, respond to SHRA and SHRA respond. I'm not sure how that information process works, Velile. I would think you would have to respond separately to both parties. I don't know if the SHRA interacts with the municipality. So I'm sorry to have to tell you, you're probably best to contact both parties yourself to make sure that is done.
If you can just answer the one after, I think it's BP, or 8 properties, after 8 properties, after years, what constitute the media to hire rental contract. You'll have my questions where I start saying, can you explain if this trial, blah, 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 it goes on that.
Okay. Okay. Is this where we start, Velile, with the agreement with the project finance company to source the 20% equity?
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
If you have to repay them, the answer would be no. If they're going to come in as a partner and be a shareholder and not want to be repaid that, then I'm sure they would then consider that, but they would have to become a shareholder in your company as well.
Yes, definitely they want to be a shareholder.
Okay. Yeah. Now then you can bring in any number of shareholders if you're all going to be shareholders of the company, as opposed to a lender providing startup financing. Yeah. Okay, so I think you've answered the same question in the next statement, that should not be a debt, it should be shareholding. That's correct, yeah. Okay, we'll just do Velile's first, and then we'll get to the others. Right, to introduce the SHRA, the equity issue, or sign an agreement if the SHRA approves such a type of equity. Well, you'd have to do that through the application process, and then we'll call the people at the SHRA up and see if they want to meet the other financiers. Can you please arrange the attendees to meet? Yeah, John, is there a forum where we could keep communicating?
Sorry, Larry, what was the question?
Well, Lila is asking here about, can you arrange all of us who are attendees to meet? Perhaps working together sorts out our challenges easily, and we can get success to our projects.
This is the platform where we sort of wanted to give an overview and treat things at a generic level. Now, case by case things will then be treated outside this meeting, where Velile says, I have a project. Can I arrange a meeting with, let's say, Sanele and Shilombe to really look at the proposed application or proposed project. And they can then provide that hands-on specific guidance. I don't want to suggest that we create another platform where, you know, we have more and more of these roundtables. Outside this, I mean, there are platforms such as and these are legislated platforms such as the PSC and so forth, which I assume you'll be touching on as part of the presentation this afternoon. So if to everyone else, if there's a specific project or case that you need now to be assisted with in trying to refine and clean it up before it can come through, we still would continue to share the contact details that we shared earlier on when we concluded QSA. I hope that would help.
Okay. There you are, Belina. Okay.
I think that was.
Okay. Then you ask how to distribute the 20% equity for the benefit of the project. Well, that's quite simple. It's 20% equity comes into the company and you use it to partially fund your development costs. I'm not sure what else you're thinking of. What happens when there's a project consultant who does project and capital raised? Can the project company pay commission? Well, those are all costs of the development. You know, whatever, there are fees and stuff paid for raising debt. So that will all have to be built into your development costs. And if it's too much, then your project consultant has to take a haircut and and charge a fee that your project can afford. Yeah. Are we allowed to move the name of the project to a newly registered company? Yeah, I think you're entitled to put the project in whichever company you have, as long as there's consistency between the owner of the land and the owner and the company. You've got to make sure they are the same party, whether you are participating as a non-profit organization or a for-profit organization. You know, that would depend on how you want to run your affairs. So ODA VAT registered, which is not deed loan. Well, the question about ODA VAT registered, which was not need a loan, it all depends on your development costs. If your development costs are kept low enough that you can fund that you can fund it with the 426,000 subsidy plus the 20% equity, then you don't need a loan. But I'm not saying that that's possible. I'm saying if your development costs were that's what your financing arrangements would be. So a social housing institution would go and get the subsidy plus raise 20% loan. In your case, you have to contribute 20% equity, so then you don't need the loan. But it all goes around the amount of the development costs. Yeah. Does the new QSC account for the subsidy as zero rated? I have been informed, I haven't checked it myself, but the latest template for the Quick Scan C seems to have dropped that VAT question, and it's causing a bit of consternation. But I think the SHRA will probably be aware of that, and they would either need to say why it's been dropped or need to put it into the Quick Scan C, back into the Quick Scan C. Because, yeah, John, that might be something to pick up with the people who run the Quick Scan C template. If we can develop why does the policy insist? Now the policy doesn't insist on having debt. It's just that it's normally required. But if you're able to develop a project within the grant quantum, well then you're doing very well. Either you're building very efficiently, or you're not building at the spec that's required. One of the two. Does the SHI also require 20% like an ODA? No, it doesn't. No. The answer is no there for Pearl. And I think we skipped a few while we stayed with Velile. Was there one? Okay, Tabo's already answered. Bronwyn. That's audio issues. The term beneficiaries to pension can be anything. There's no special provision for specific categories like people needing support or care or disabled, although you're encouraged to provide units for disabled. You know, many of the social housing projects have a number of units suitable for disabled, but it's not a requirement to put pensioners or disabled into the project. Okay. There are guidelines for Bait properties about what constitutes medium to high rental stock. What's the minimum number? I'm not aware what that number is, but there are metrics applied like that of so many units per hectare and that sort of stuff. Has anyone got guidelines about that can answer the question? Yeah. So Bait properties, it seems like we are unable to answer the question without some research. Okay, the next one. Velile, we've addressed Velile's question there. Tabo, that's the same about the fact sheet. Velile's financing. Tabile, would you repeat the section about confirmations from provincial governments? I think I heard you saying the provincial approval in their portion no longer applies. My understanding is that this is all centralized now. You used to have the components of the subsidy were institutional subsidy run through the provincial department and the restructuring capital grant administered by the SHRA. My understanding is that these are now all being centralized through the SHRA as a combined consolidation grant, is it? CCG? Yeah. Could you confirm that, John? Okay. Not getting any confirmation there, so let's move on. Equity issue, that's Velile and Velile and Velile Ismail. The same sort of question about the grant quantum, yeah, and Pearl. Okay, so we've done that. Still any hands up? Mabandla, is your hand permanently up, or you got a new question? Belinda, do you have a new question? Yeah. Hi, is that Mabandla? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do have a question.
Okay.
When I visited the local municipality regarding their form for long-term lease on the land, they asked the same thing that is asked by SHRA, bankability of the start. So we're asking ourselves which door we should first knock on, but according to the project police, I think it's SHRA. We should submit all the bankability to SHRA, then I think SHRA should talk to the departments, especially the city planning and development ruling. I'm not sure I'm correct. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I'm also not sure of how the SHRA interacts with municipalities, but those projects I've been part of, it was every authority having their own information requirements and those being submitted directly to that authority. John, are you able to help on any interaction between the SHRA and the municipalities?
Yeah, Larry, I'm actually trying to understand, but without going into the specifics of the case, perhaps was it Velile can make
It's
contact
Mabandla
with.
asking the question.
Yes.
I thought it was Velile.
No, it's Velile.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, because it sounds like because remember, municipality still has roles and responsibilities, and SHRA cannot twist their arm in fulfilling those roles and responsibilities. So it'd be interesting to understand what exactly would be that thing that he is not winning on with regard to municipality and you being able to conclude your application so that you can come through.
What do you do for? What do you do for? What do you do for?
Are you asking me?
Yes, I thought you're saying there are challenges with municipality. There's pillar to post. They sending you back to the SHRA, but I'm saying, what is it exactly that the municipality is giving you a runaround on? That we can then perhaps say we are able to intervene or not on the matter.
Okay.
Okay. It's not. They're not sending us to pillar to post. What I've picked up the list, the land list. Remember, the land belongs to them in our project. They agree that they're going to give us the land list, the long term. But when I look at the content of the form, I realize that it says one thing: it's bankability. The question is about should I submit to them the same stuff that I submit to SHRA, because they need a feasibility study. And also now we are going the ODA way. We need to submit to SHRA the very same feasibility study. So what I'm asking, because they need this, they ask the same thing. They said if you submit a feasibility study, we give you the land.
So you have performed feasibilities on that piece of land, and you're not sure who you need to submit that to. So have they given you a list? Let's just start there. And you see, I was trying to run away from now dealing with specifics around specific cases. This is why I earlier on advised that would be good to deal with issues outside this on case by case. But yeah, I mean, the important bit for Velile to make contact with Shilombe and Sanele, and perhaps look at what do you have in place currently, and where can we assist you in terms of guidance.
Okay, I understand. Yes, I think you have their emails. I think I've seen them at the beginning.
Yes.
Yes. I would appreciate if this recording can be also sent to me because you have recorded the session for today. Is it possible?
Yeah, certainly we will share the recordings and the guides and everything else post tomorrow. Larry, I think you should proceed. I'm just looking at the time. We were supposed to conclude in the next 20 minutes, and I'm not sure how much you still have to cover.
Yeah, I think we've got a few slides still left to cover. We might not do all of them because some of them we've already covered, but I'm just going to go through the next stages of this sort of case study that we've put together. So I'll conclude with those. Is everyone okay? We've gone past when we were meant to have a break, but no point having a break now with only a few minutes left to go. So we'll proceed. Okay, so let's get back to where we are. So we've done the other delivery agent VAT registered seen that you can actually spend a bit more, make the units a bit nicer if you want to. So if this was the 132 units, I think we've mentioned the income bands and rental bands that everyone understands those. So in this particular case, this is how we would break down those 132 units. So the primary units are meant to be for income bands 1850 to 66,700, and 40 over 132 is 30%. So that would need to be, and I took these percentages from the new QuickScan C as a sort of a guideline. 5% must be in, at least 5% in the smaller one bed 35 square meter range, then 25% in one bed, one bath, and then it's 15%, 30%, and 25% in the higher income bands. And the average rental in those bands of 722, 1460, then 2790, 3950, and 5417 for the upper band. And there'd be 40 units in primary, there'd be 92 units in secondary, making up a total of 132 units. So that's that part of it. We then moving on to what that would turn out to in terms of rental income. So we've just multiplied those figures out from the previous table. So we'd be earning 440,000 a month from the different rentals. We've got a vacancy and bad debt factor combined of 7%. Operating costs, we've used 1,600 as a generic average operating costs. More efficient people operate for less than that. There are some very inefficient companies who operate for much more than that, but they somehow seem to get bailed out by rescue finance from somewhere. But 1,600 is the general average that we are using. So our net monthly rental will be 440 minus 30,000 vacancy and bad debt, minus 211,000 operating costs, giving us net monthly rental of 198,000. Annual rental at 12 months, 2.38 million. A market capitalization rate of 13%. Gives us an open market value of 18 million. So the lenders like to have a loan to value ratio. So for an ODA, we'd either have 0 if it was in that first one of building at the same amount, as the minimum subsidy plus equity contribution, or if we took the maximum loan of 100,000 per unit, we would have a loan to value ratio of 57%. And if we were a social housing institution, we'd have a loan to value ratio of 72%. The financing institutions generally won't lend to you if you've got a loan to value of over 80%. So either way, we should be fine. Then just looking at what that picture would look like for a funding structure. For a social housing institution without VAT registration, obviously there's no developer's equity for social housing institutions. The grant would be 81% of our development cost, and our loan facility would be 19%, and we would be funding 69 million, and our average cost per unit would be 526,000 per unit, which is 426 subsidy plus 100,000 loan. If we had VAT registration, we'd get the same grant, same facility, loan facility, but our VAT refund would allow us to spend more on development. So we could have a total development cost of 77 million, and our average cost per unit could increase to 587, not 526. And that is a whole lot more attractive. So the conclusion is SHRs can spend more on development and develop a better product if they're able to claim the input VAT on development costs on the proportion of development costs funded by the subsidy. So you're getting back about 80% of your VAT you've paid. But you can only do that. It's quite a complex structuring process. You've got to have a development company in your group as a social housing institution. If we're another delivery agent, the picture changes a bit more. So in this case, we've got 20% equity contribution. You remember that our ratio in the SHI was 81 to 19%, so we've actually got too much. We don't need a loan. I should have just turned that to 0, but we're able to fund the whole development without any loan. If we wanted to push the development costs and we took a loan, this is how much we'd be able to spend per unit, 631,000, excluding VAT. So including VAT would be even more. So that 20% equity virtually replaces your loan if you're going to be able to develop at a reasonable cost. Yeah, so that concludes the numbers part of it. Any questions at this stage? Okay, that's good. Let's keep going. Not far to go now. So, yes, the debt funding terms, I'm sure you're all familiar with these. Your term loans are normally 15 to 20 years, normally amortized, but you can have different terms. You can have interest with a bullet payment at the end. Interest rates are either prime plus a margin or JIBAR linked plus a margin. There's a bond raising fee. It doesn't have to be 350. It can be, in this example, they probably spent 350 on a bond raising fee. But that would just depend on the negotiations you have with the financier. Interest during construction is capitalized into the loan facility, and it appears as a development cost as well. The security for the first mortgage bond on the property. Often they'll ask for cession of rentals as well, and a cession of insurance, and undertakings about how to fund any cash flow shortfalls. There's a graph about the interest rates going back many, many years. So if we go now, we're still at a relatively low compared to the long history of very high inflation rates, but we are still in a rising trend, so these could still go up. In COVID, everybody was keen to lend just to keep things going. So now it's rising again. So delivery agent has to pay back the debt. So borrowing's like a wedding, repaying is like mourning. I would add a third on here to have a happy face at the end. Once you've repaid, then you can celebrate the relief. Just the last few slides. So the construction is seen as the conversion of raw materials into defined outputs by a managed process. I'm sure you're all aware of this. The built environment is the process of establishing and fulfilling contracts and converting raw materials into buildings. Various components of a construction team. I don't think you need to be told all of this. But you must be interacting with your local authority, interacting with your funder, you as the employer interacting with a professional team, and there'll be a main contractor who does the main development, and they'll have a head office and be on site, and then they'll interact with the material suppliers, and you'll have plant hire companies, you'll have site establishment, site admin and management, and a big impact and start doing this early is with the community. That's establishing whether your market, you do that as well, but you're trying to get your labor in from the local community. And you can do that by employing directly as labor or have subcontractors for their various purposes. But there's community benefit to be gained. So property risks, invasion of land, building hijacking, expropriation of land without compensation. Yeah, but we've always got to be mindful of these and having mitigation measures to reduce the risk. Well, the rise of the new construction mafia. I hope those don't affect us, and anyone in the room doesn't have any links to the construction mafia. So, right. So property management, that comes after your development, and that's overseeing the tenanting of the buildings. The most important thing at that stage is your tenant acceptance criteria. You've got to get the right people into the buildings. You've got to get people within those income ranges and people who it matters to have pride in paying their rental. You you can't have people organizing rent boycotts and that kind of stuff. You should do a thorough investigation on them at the tenant acceptance phase to minimize that risk. So those property management functionings, we'll start with your leasing, then it's rent collection and maintenance. If you're not maintaining your properties, people are going to hold that against you and not be keen to pay their rent. So you've got to keep that side of it going. You've got to do your administration. Very careful about if people are paying late, make sure they get their 7-day letter on the 7th day. Make sure you're recording your receipts on the same day. If you get slow with that process, you get behind and people start thinking you're condoning late payment. You cannot let the tenants feel that you're condoning late payment. You have to interact with them. Even if you're going to give them a payment holiday for various reasons, if they lost a job or whatever, but you have to interact with them. So that's keeping your administration going. And then you've got to have your overall budgeting and financial control. Obviously, strict control on in your development phase, on your development costs, followed up by strict control of your operating costs during your operating phase. And this is just a graph which I've seen on other presentations as well. It's the picture of how things go about in the shroud. Tinashe had one earlier where it was sort of directional with arrows moving through the different processes. This is demonstrated differently. So from your application being submitted, going through the routes through the assessment routes and eventually to the council approving it. And that's done through the compliance and regulation section. And then the other divisions of the SHRA facilitate the institutional capacitation and project facilitation and release the funding as well. So, and one of today's things is sector development intervention, which is, we're helping with spreading the knowledge of social housing. And that concludes our presentation for the way to success in funding your social housing projects. And fluit my story is uit, as we say in Afrikaans. Any questions?
Hi, Larry.
Hi, who's that?
Hi, it's Susan. It's Susan.
Hello, Susan. Yes.
I'm good, and you?
Well,
And
thank you. Yes.
and good day to all of you guys. My question is, I'm from Mpangeni, that is KZN. We've got a lot of land that is kind of semi-rural, where you find that the piece of land that is rezoned or restructured for such project, it's next to the town, but at the same time, half of that piece of land is owned by tribal or the king or something. How does it work? Will it be possible to have a project in such areas? Because there's a lot of piece of beautiful land. For example, if you go towards Hluhluwe Game Reserve, the place is the game reserve. It's under the municipality, and then just one road on the other side, it's a land that belongs to the king. How does that one work? Because it's a beautiful land, but you just wonder if it's possible to do such projects over there.
Susan, are you aware if a restructuring zone has been declared where that land is?
I'm not sure about that. I'm just asking. It's a general question because I've seen a list from SHRA of those pieces of lands that are available nationally, but in that area I did not see anything, honestly. So I'm not sure what kind of arrangement municipality has. And it's just a general.
From what you've described, I would say it's unlikely because the restructuring zones are generally aimed at, they were originally in the main metros, and then they expanded that to other bigger towns and cities. And I am not aware of any restructuring zones in a rural environment. Having to meet the requirement for medium to high density would not fulfill, you wouldn't be able to fulfill that requirement. It's a normal requirement for a restructuring zone. But that's not to say it can't happen, if the right motivations are made. But that would
the reason why I'm sorry to cut off. The reason why I'm asking you about that, it's because the land is beautiful. It's got a potential. It's close to all the amenities. They were planning to build a mall in that area, and also there is a game reserve for tourism and stuff like that. And about 5 to 10 kilometers, you can see there is the sea. So it's a good area. It's just that it's rural. That's why I'm asking if be changes or there will be adjustment or amendments to what when it comes to trial in terms of those, because the place is set for development, but I don't think SHA knows that area or something.
No, as normally happens with these projects, there has to be a driver who's got who's got an incentive to make a change. And so that would need somebody to drive that process, and it would need people around you in your area to take on that responsibility, to make that a project and get it declared as a restructuring zone.
Thank you so much.
Okay, good luck.
Thank you.
Sounds like the sort of place where you'd want to
assist, Larry.
Just
maybe to assist. I think what we will do as part of the handouts, we will distribute a list of the gazetted restructuring zones, because I think the debate with which area is and which area isn't and all that, it's not going to be an argument that we win. It is clear where social housing investment has to go. The location or the area must be gazetted. It's straightforward as that. And if you want to frustrate yourself much, and which we advise not to, is to open yourself up to a debate and discussion of how do you get an area to be gazetted and so forth. Because as we said earlier, this is a very long process and which does not even sit within our mandate as a SHRA. We can assist the stakeholders such as municipalities and the provinces, but that's as far as we go with regard to this issue. So the best we can do at this point is really to say to an applicant, focus yourself in identifying potential project opportunities within restructuring zones, because anything else would be frustrating yourself and waste of time and resources as well.
Thanks, John. Yeah. Any other questions? I think we've just gone past our designated time, so thank you for your attention, and I hope you found that interesting, if not entertaining. And so tomorrow we'll move on to the quick scan C. John, I see there was a question about the zero rating of the subsidies. It would be nice to have a chat this afternoon to check on that in the new quick scan C. Are you able to bring in the person who looks after the quick scan C to a meeting this afternoon? Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'd need more details on that to be able to respond adequately.
But there must be somebody at the SHRA who takes care of the quick scan C, and I can explain exactly to them what the question would be about. Okay. So hopefully we can do it before tomorrow, because we don't want to have that affecting the quick scan C.
I assume we are at the end tail, but maybe before I give my closing remarks and we adjourn, let's see if there are any few items that we can still take, or questions, comments that we can take. Let's start with you, Thabo.
Greetings once again. I know I have a question about the fact sheet. So I don't know if your colleagues were able to join so that we can answer that question.
All right, I have Sanele here, but remember, as we said, to your question, the fact sheet is that first document that you'd be required to populate and submit with certain supporting documents. So Sanele manages with Shilombe, who's also on the call, that process. I guess I would want to hand you over to Sanele at this stage, and Shilombe, if there's anything that Sanele has left out, you can add to.
What is the question exactly, Thabo? About the fact sheet?
Or the issue was that at what stage does the fact sheet come in the whole process?
Oh, okay.
And
so
there was also the timeline or something like that.
The fact sheet is the initial document that you receive when you send an email to projects@shra.org.za. You would receive an acknowledgement letter number 1. That is accompanied by the fact sheet, which is the document that captures the high-level information of your project, the directors, the unit yields, and how far you are with the project in terms of percentages and how you are with packaging and so on and so forth. So when you populate the fact sheet in response to that email from projects, you would send it back with the registration documents for your company, as well as the ID copies of your directors, as well as the BBBE certificate. In terms of timelines, I mean, this is the first document that you'd receive from the SHRA after having sent us the email saying that you have a project and you're interested in submitting a project. Usually we don't have a timeline to this. We receive them as and when they do come back from the applicant. But just to complete my response, so after you send us back the fact sheet and the documents that are required to support it, you would then get a second letter, acknowledgement letter number 2. That letter then is accompanied by the project application pack, which contains your quick scan A, quick scan C, Quick Scan B and Quick Scan C documents, there you will be able to then package your project. So the timeline to that is 7 days. We give you 7 days to then populate all the tools and provide the supporting documents for your Quick Scan A, Quick Scan B, and Quick Scan C. You send that back within 7 days, and then you'll receive a third letter confirming that your project has been registered onto the project pipeline and has been allocated to either myself or Shilombe Mageza, who's also in the room with us, for pre-screening.
Thank you, Sanele. With that, I hope that
I hope Thabo is answered.
Thabo is answered.
Not fully, because if let's say it takes more than 3 months for you to get a response, what process do you want me to follow?
It takes more than 3 months to get a response?
Yes, once you submit.
Are you
the fact sheet or after you have submitted your project?
Yes, the fact sheet.
So the fact sheet is not really, there's no approval to the fact sheet. You just send it back to us, and that triggers you receiving the application pack. If you're saying it takes 3 months, I'm just not sure what you're referring to.
No, in my case, I submitted in June, and to date, I have not received anything, any correspondence.
You submitted a fact sheet?
Yes.
Can I ask you to send an email to project@shroud.org.za so that we can follow up? My colleague Tuli, I think, is also in this meeting. She will then jump in and assist you just to trace the project that you're referring to.
Okay, now I'll do so.
But generally, it shouldn't. It's literally just you send the email and you should get a response back with the application pack. So we'll look into that, Thabo, and what really transpired there.
Okay, thank you. I'll send an email again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I see that's the only hand, and I don't think I'm missing anyone. Quickly going to the chat. I take it, Larry, that you have looked at the chat and would have responded to any questions that were raised there. I think on that score, let me then say a thank you to everyone for joining us for today. There's a lot, I think, that one still has to digest. Tomorrow, as Larry has indicated, we'll just zoom in and only into the frequency and just really unpack the numbers. On that score, let's start tomorrow at 9 so that we can give adequate attention to this one important tool into this process. I've spoken specifically and tried to direct everyone who may have specific queries or case-by-case inquiries to please make contact with Shilombe and Sanele. We will make available the contact details when we do the mail shot, which will come with not only the recordings, but any other handouts. For an example, list of the restructuring zones, which as I listened, was one of the hot topics today. Those handouts, colleagues, give us some bit of time. I don't anticipate that it will be longer than 2 days after we finished with tomorrow's session. It's just for us to get everything in one mail shot, and that should be ready to come into your inbox. Let's then, on that score, close the session and meet tomorrow. And thank you very much. Let me just then ask for maybe 5 minutes with Tinashe and Larry while everyone else logs out. Thanks, everyone. See you guys tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye.
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 Thank you, bye.
Bye.